everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Boxing history again, so hold on to your butts, dude. I'm here with Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, and of course, my dude, fellow fight history fanatic. We just love this stuff. That's what we're here for. Aris, what's up, man? How are you?
Everything's good, man. My barber's on vacation, hence why I got to wear a hat this week. But
Mine too. I know the feeling.
other than that, everything is good. Everything is chilling, man. It's been nice weather out here, and fall's kind of been kicking in and everything like that. And we're here to talk some history, like you said. So
Hell yeah, dude. It's we're trying something a little bit different today because I mean we have like part 2 and 3 and 9 and all this type of stuff to catch up on different topics, but in the meanwhile, like we'd like to keep it rolling, keep it moving. Sometimes we do contemporary stuff, but we're sticking with the history today and we're doing some mythical matchups. So my idea was to do mythical matchups, but to keep it tight, to keep it snappy, and to keep it moving. Your idea was to go, we each took like a mythical matchup from each of the original 8 weight divisions from flyweight to heavyweight and just thought of, a fight that we would like to see. And I don't know. I mean, I think that between us, we could come up with some pretty fun ones. I don't know that it's so much of a debate is just so much as we,
you just talk about it, man.
We just discuss.
Because why would it be a debate when it's a fights that honestly, they're unmakeable because of the time periods or whatever. So I mean, it's like it's just fun to talk about. It's fun to mix and match people throughout history. It's always been a fun subject.
Totally.
If you're a follower of Doug Fisher on his his mailbag columns throughout the years, one of the favorite topics that always came up was fans and readers and stuff like that sending in mythical matchups for him to answer. So yeah.
I actually remember that from back in the day on Max Boxing.
He's been doing it for a long time. I don't know if he even still has. I don't even know if he still has a mailbag or anything like that. But I mean, like it goes back to like the early 2000s.
He used to do he used to talk about old school Southern California, like from the 60s and 70s boxing. And at the time, it's stuff that I didn't know shit about it. Did never heard of it. And there's so many names that I was like, ooh. But it caused me to look up so many of these. And that was a lot of that stuff was the inspiration behind getting into a lot more boxing history and stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, totally. And a lot of people seem to like mythical matchups. And it's always been, you must be out of your goddamn mind. Sugar Ray Robinson, the greatest fighter that ever lived. It's a constant. It's a constant among fight fans,
Absolutely, man. And like I said, it goes in every sport. People like to debate who's the greatest quarterback ever or whatever it may be. And was Michael Jordan the GOAT or is it LeBron James now or whatever goes on. So when it comes to boxing, when you can have so many legends in each division, especially in the original 8 weight classes, which we're going to like focus on today. I mean, a lot of those classes like heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, they go all the way back, especially heavyweight and middleweight, and like the various fighters that came through there. It's fascinating when you think about mixing and matching the start of them. There's video games that have been able to like make us realize our dreams over the years to a degree. We're still waiting on a new one for over a decade now. ESBC, I'm looking at you, and gotta be said.
Give
right?
us games. Give us.
Dude, I mean, don't get me wrong, man. Not to veer off track really quick, but like Fight Night is still fun for a game that came out in what was that, like 2011 or so? I think it was. It's still a good game if you're able to get like if you play it. It's still the mechanics of it and everything like that. It's better than anything UFC has put out and EA's put out with UFC over the years, in my opinion. So it's still a fun game, but yeah, man, it's just been way overdue. But because everybody has an ego in boxing and no one wants to sign over licenses and yada 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 and all this other stupid shit, well, no one can do anything. Anyways, but that was like the closest thing because you can like the fighters that are already in the game plus people that are creating guys. Some of them were really talented too and making them almost identical. And then you're able to mix and match. So that's the closest we can kind of do it. Even back in the day too, when you had like board games and other stuff that you and I.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's like dice games back in the day that you could do.
Man, that like me, you, Gray, and Corey Erdman, Gray Johnson and Corey Erdman love to talk about and shoot the shit about. Like all these things, there's always been stuff that you can kind of mix and match. So boxing fans have always been of the idea of mixing of fantasy fights. even I think the most famous one you can, for an example, would be Muhammad Ali and Rocky Marciano when they did that computerized fight in the late '60s, which still to this day is fascinating, odd, and various other things.
Yeah, Marciano's on there with a awful
Right?
rug.
Yeah.
He's lost a little bit of weight, but still looks pudgy.
Yeah.
Definitely looks older. Like they're
Ali was obviously pudgy himself because he was in exile at that point and on the college circuit. And wasn't
there's
really
actually there's a whole bunch of clips on YouTube. Like they shot different endings and shit like that. It's pretty funny,
yeah,
dude.
totally.
It's pretty funny. But
And
yeah,
then
so
certain cities where Marciano was popular, he won. The other cities where I was popular, he would win. And that's how they did it in the theaters.
which is, yeah, I mean, even just the idea of that's pretty amazing. That was 1969, I believe,
Yeah.
and it was when Ali was in exile. So I mean, that was even before he'd accomplished a whole number of things. So I mean, it's amazing that he was already thought of as truly great before then. But that's the whole point, is that being able to use our imaginations for this stuff. It takes some extrapolation. It takes some some imagination. And it's obviously what we're talking about. It's not definitive. It's just for fun. But if you have other ideas, if you're watching or if you're listening, just shoot them back to us. You know what I mean? Argue your viewpoint. I'm down for it. Like I'm not going to say that I'm going to like argue you back. I'm just saying, I'm always down to hear other points of view. But let's start with the big boys. Let's start with the big guys. Yeah, at heavyweight. What would you think is a really good mythical matchup? What's your
One of them
entry?
I was thinking about earlier today, and I was going back and forth, and there's a lot of guys, and a lot of people would be like, "Oh, Ali, Joe Lewis, or this one and that," for example, like Foreman, Lennox Lewis, or something. But one that came off of me that I was thinking about today, and I was like, "Wow, that would be a fascinating fight." And at their peaks, I'm not even sure, and that would be Larry Holmes against Sonny Liston, the battle of the greatest jabs in history, you would say, aside from Lewis, maybe.
Man, because it's like you have like you posted earlier today talking about the anniversary of Larry Holmes
Holmes,
eating
Ernie
that
Shavers.
just ghastly right hand from Ernie Shavers, that some person had the audacity of saying that it was just some normal punch or something like that.
There's a few chuckle.
Chill.
I'm gonna say it right now. There was a few chuckle fucks on Twitter today that would just be like, "That's not the hardest punch ever, bro."
Chill.
Or maybe, I mean, look, it's ranked up there. I don't know. I'm just, in generality, most people say that, so I'm not even arguing that. It's the fact that when people say that's clearly not the hardest punch Holmes ever took. Holmes has said on more than one occasion, every single time he's ever been interviewed, and he's not said it because it's like the popular thing to say, like Floyd Mayweather talking about Emmanuel Augustus. Like, this is legit. Holmes and every other heavyweight from that era has always, everybody, all of them have said the same thing. When Ernie Shavers hit you, they never felt anything like that. All right. The only reason why Holmes got up is because he hit the canvas so goddamn hard that it woke him back up and he was jolted away. Holmes has said on many occasions, if Shavers just didn't hit him as hard, which is impossible, but like somehow just didn't have the full force that he did, because that was the hardest punch Shavers ever thrown. He said it all the time. If he had hit him though, like the way he hit, I don't know, maybe Bernardo Mccall or somebody else, Holmes might have been down for the count. But instead, Holmes you jawed up and you saw him, man, completely blind-eyed, wonky. He had no idea what happened to him. It was like, look, there was the equivalent, I would say, Pat, in my opinion, it was the equivalent of like a Looney Tunes cartoon when you take an anvil and it drops down and kills Wile E. Coyote. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, it was brutal, dude. It was just an absolutely gnarly shot. And it's the kind of thing that for me, when people argue stuff back, like I mean, just even small stuff like, oh, that cut's not that bad, or something's not that bad. Think about when so and so fought on with a broken jaw or blah blah blah. And I'm like, bro, what you're talking about is the outliers. You're talking about extreme cases, and that's why you're bringing it up. That's why you remember it fucking 12 years later. It's because that shit was so crazy. And so you can't compare just everyday shit to something that is the extreme outlier all the way to the top. Like, anyway, so same type of shit, like, where we remember it like this because that shit was a gnarly punch. And if Larry Holmes himself is talking about that's the fucking hardest he's ever been hit, I believe him. And I'm not going to argue with him. But I would say that generally speaking, he's probably, I mean, a little bit more hittable overall than Ali at his best. But like, that's the thing, is that like, he has the recuperative powers, so it's tough to say. But Sonny could really fucking hit. He could really hit himself, and even just his jab, if they're going jab for jab, yeah. Larry had a great jab, but Sonny's jab was like a power punch in itself.
Angelo Dundee would always say, and others from that whole era that witnessed Liston live or just watched it on television, whatever it was, you could just tell it that Liston had that type of jab that had not been seen since the days of Joe Louis, where it wasn't just a jab where it controlled the action, like it busted you up, it broke your nose, it broke your face, it can knock you out and knock your teeth out. Like Liston, everything hurt with him. And the minute you got in the ring with Liston, he was such an intimidating force to begin with. He wasn't the tallest guy, but he had those long arms. He was just built like an ox. And the most intimidating, scariest resting bitch face you'd ever seen in your life, where he
the most massive hands I've ever seen, dude.
Yes, and just his reputation in general, because it was from his past and everything like that, and the way conservative America in the 50s and 60s looked at him, just completely with back away arms. And this, we're talking about the era when mobsters ran boxing and it was already like really shady and things going on. They looked at people like that, and they looked at Liston, they were just like, oh God, like, he had this dark cloud over, like really bad one. And it's unfortunate. I mean, we've talked about him before in his whole past, everything like that. But like, so a lot of fighters, when they got in the ring with him, whether they wanted to or not, when they did and they see what was going on, they're just like, oh, and they finally look across the ring, and dudes were just reduced to absolute rubble. And we're talking about some of the best in the era, the guys that Floyd Patterson was forced to avoid because of Customato. Zora Foley, Cleveland Williams, Eddie Machin. The list goes on and on. Liston wiped them all out. Machin was the only one to go to distance with Liston out of that type of era when, Liston was just bombarding these dudes like they were pinballs left and right. Foley got blasted in 3 rounds. Cleveland Williams wasn't able to last 3 rounds in the 2 fights he went with Liston. He did good. He bloody Liston's nose. Probably would have knocked out most other heavyweights with the barrage he hit. But Liston was, not only did he hit so hard, he was a stone cold rock too. So he just boom, 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 boom. And Williams was just splayed out the way Ali did it to him years later. So, man, you put them at their peaks, dude, and you just kind of like, holy crap, you got stoned and
I think that I'd probably go with Larry just because I think that he's the greater fighter, and he'd probably find a way to win. Like just, and he's probably seen or gone through better adversity than Sonny Liston. But I mean, Sonny's got that kind of power that it's like you can never count a fighter like that out. But generally speaking, I'm going to go with Larry Holmes.
I think Holmes would have to go through a lot of hell at first. But like you said, Pat, there was more layers to Holmes' game, I would say, too. Like, Holmes over the years has been more so compared to Ali as, like, the dancing, well, not so much a dancing master, but yeah, like being on flight of foot, always flicking the jab and moving stuff like that. Or Holmes has always been known to be relying on the 1-2, which he was. A lot of his highlights, you see him doing that. Boom, 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 boom. But if you do watch Larry Holmes, and Carlos Azevedo from Hamilcar Boxing has mentioned that in the series that he wrote about Holmes's title defenses, you would notice that in each defense too, Holmes would adapt to what was in front of him. Like there was, he wasn't just relying on the 1-2. Like with each round and things presented to him, he would, work on those openings. Like he did have a great uppercut and necessary. He could have a good inside.
Yeah, I was going to say he had a really good uppercut.
Really good uppercut. Like he did have a good inside game when necessary. He could go to the body if he had to. The combinations weren't just all that. Like he could be very fluid in his punch output. And like you said, man, his recuperative powers were second to none. I mean, the only one you could see, like he was on par with Ali, who was unfathomable with the way he could recover himself. But like when we talked about the way Holmes got dropped today against Shavers, also a couple of years later, he gets dropped against Renato Snipes. Not quite as hard as what Shavers did to him, because that was just, ungodly, but hard enough that the average heavyweight would have been completely, short-circuited from that. And Holmes gets up. Holmes stumbles headfirst into the corner post, which would have been a surefire fight in 2022 for a fight to be stopped immediately.
Yeah, for sure.
And you see his eyes again. He has the same like blank stare in his face, kind of that he did with Shavers. Not so much as much, but just still clearly he's like a little bit stargazed. And Snipes gets in, gets very excited. Snipes' corner is getting really excited. The whole arena is getting excited, and as everybody did when they hurt Larry Holmes, they got a little bit overzealous, and he's just wailing away. And Holmes, with the recuperative powers that he did, within a few seconds or 20, 30 seconds or so, had already got himself back, and then you see him boom, boom, and coming right back just viciously. And that was the thing about Holmes, man. If you hurt him, and once he got his game, his mojo back, bro, you got to get prepared because he was going to get some back quick. Like he wasn't going to let you, take that.
Yeah, you could say it however you want. These days, the youngsters say got that dog in him.
Yeah,
that's exactly what he had. You hit him, he wasn't cool with that. It wasn't just he needed to get the last word, and he'd get nasty. He'd start talking to you. He'd start tormenting your ass. So that's I'd probably go with Larry, dude. He just had that. He had that it factor more than Sonny did.
You remember that nasty fact, the thing you just mentioned? Remember the Michael Greer video you posted up years ago? So Larry Holmes, it was like 1991 or so. So obviously Holmes, who talked all the way back in the early 80s about retiring in 81 and 82. This is going to be my last year in boxing, yada, yada, yada. Still, Holmes is here in the early 90s, and it'll still be a full decade before he actually retired. Anyways, he was fighting a middling heavyweight by the name of Michael Greer, who was a more or less a journeyman or so from the cruiserweight era in the heavyweight era at that time. So what happened, Pat, right? Greer gets him on the ropes and hit him with a couple of shots that Larry felt disrespected by.
Yeah, dude, it was a literal, it was almost as if this is the exact sequence they got that you trying to embarrass me on national TV, from Great White Hype. It was almost like an exact boxing. Well, that's probably what they got it from, because Larry was just like, really?
He was hitting on the back of the head, wasn't he, or something like that? Or
he clipped him, and then they came inside, and then he started, like he was like starting to feel himself. Like he was like, "Oh, I'm roughing you up," and started like kind of rabbit punching him and kind of roughing him up a little bit. And Larry was just like, "Okay."
Holmes walked in and went hands down and just pummeled him.
And he just walked him down and was just like, no, not today, buddy. And just absolutely fucking slept him, like just hammered him. Oh my God, poor guy. It's got to be on YouTube.
It is on YouTube. I sent it to you.
That's how we found it. I'm sure it's still up, but it's just like, my God, dude, poor
over
guy.
And over too. Like Larry was relishing this. How motherfucking
dude, like he was just punishing him.
You know what I mean?
Like he stole something.
Oh yeah. The kid just
like the audacity. He wasn't having it.
Like, man, you don't disrespect the legend, but I gotta go with that. That was my entry for the heavyweight division.
That's a pretty good one. That's a very good one. I think mine is probably going to be something a little bit more for the purists, the hashtag purists. But I thought it was fun, especially because of the height difference. And I think that it's far more legit, because I was just like, all right, who's the, in my opinion, greatest like big heavyweight, and then who's like the actual greatest small heavyweight, like actual greatest, and I use that word, I emphasize actual greatest. So I thought Lennox Lewis is going to be my greatest big heavyweight. No disrespect to either of the Klitschko brothers, but
you have the right choice.
And my greatest small heaveweight's going to have to be Sam Langford. I know there's going to be some people that are like, wait a second, Jack Dempsey's the giant killer. Hold on, Rocky Marciano's the blah, blah, blah. I'm going to say, no, I'm sorry. Sam Langford beat better fighters, and he was just the greater fighter overall.
And Dempsey would have told you that too.
And Dempsey himself said in his own book, and some people will write it off as he's like, oh, he's just being gracious. But Dempsey was like, I was scared of that guy. I didn't want to fight him. Fuck that. He said it. I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't have said it if he didn't mean it. But he had a reason to say it, because Sam Langford was a scary, scary fighter who came all the way up from lightweight, dude. He fought all the way down at even a little below lightweight, went all the way up to heavyweight. And as a heavyweight, obviously he was not a ripped fellow, but that's what makes it even crazier, is he was just laying fools out at like 5'8" and just like fucking pummeling them, dude. And so, I think that logically you think about it and go, oh, well, I think Lennox Lewis has got this in the bag. He probably does, dude. You know what? He probably does. Great big fighter against a great small fighter. I can dig that argument, but you also, I think that put him in with somebody like Sam Langford, who just was better on the inside, And there's video. Like, this is not just some like Harry Greb situation where you're imagining, well, he must have been like, dude, there's video. You can watch him.
And
This
there's
dude,
good video. There's clear
yeah,
video.
he's mobile. He knows what the fuck he's doing inside. He's, punching in combination. He's clearly a big puncher. And he was laying dudes out at that time too, when like newspaper decisions were like flying left and right. So I think that it's safe to say that he would at the very least be able to hold his own in there. Like, and I'm not talking about resumes. I'm talking about like, putting them in there together.
Oh, absolutely, man. We discussed it on a couple more recent show when we were talking about Langford fighting fireman Jim Flynn, that stupid lunghead, and just sleeping him. And it's like Langford's style, especially for that time period. We're talking the whole early 1900s, and back then, because that's like the most prevalent footage that we have of like the turn of the century when it comes to like famous fighters and all that. A lot of those styles don't really hold up when you look at it. Like, people, you read newspaper accounts of the fights of Stanley Ketchel against Billy Papke and other fights of that era and how savage they are and yada yada yada. And then you watch the clips of them on YouTube of surviving footage. And yeah, I get it. Like a lot of them are not in real time. They're kind of sped up and other things are going on like that. But you get the general gist of what's going on. And when you see all the clinching and the mauling and everything happening, and you're just like, oh, this is like this would be like
Yeah,
hard to
dude, we've
watch.
talked about it before. Some of it's just borderline unwatchable. Like, it's just like,
Extremely,
oh,
extremely, yeah. Like really, the minute they get in, there's no like jabbing or anything. They literally just go in like a couple of billy, just
it,
clinching, and they just start milling
like
away.
a
So
really big part of their game was like they'd be like this and they'd be going like locked up inside, moving their heads because they're sitting there trying to
just
like Jimmy, they're fucking like, it's like, what the fuck is this? It was awful.
it's pretty awful, exactly. But Langford's style is different, man. Like Langford could box. Sure, it's still a blend of like the old time and contemporary style, but his style holds up, and you can see the brilliance that all the people talked about back then. And what makes it even more fascinating is that he is totally smaller than everybody else too. When you see the giants of his era, you see the Joe Jeanette, you see the Jack Johnsons, you see the other guys who are a lot bigger than he is. And I agree with you, Pat. Like he did have to reach the limit. There were guys out there that were just completely too big for him that he wasn't able to beat. Fred Fulton, for example, who was a giant for the era, skill for skill, Langford dwarfs him in that department because Fulton wasn't anything to write home about. But Fulton was an absolute giant of a human. And the only dude I know that just annihilated him in a few seconds was Jack Dempsey. And even there, so was some controversy surrounding that in terms of gloves and yada yada yada. But Fulton was able to beat Sam Langford. Harry Wills, for example, another contemporary black fighter that was ducked by Dempsey and known as one of the greats of that time. He also had, I wouldn't say Langford's number. They split a bunch of fights, but Wills got the general better of it. So if you consider that, and then if you want to think of Lennox and the way he was as the modern big man, and just like you said, I consider him the greatest big man as well ever. Like the way Emmanuel Stewart was. I mean, Lennox was, before he lost to Oliver Mccall, was still a very good fighter. You know what I mean? He threw in combination, he was well and everything. But after he lost that fight, and when Emmanuel Stewart took over and just like kind of, retooled his style a little bit and made him more relaxed, and the way he just had everything going for him and just made him, use his size. Everything worked for Lennox. Like he was almost unbeatable for a while. Yeah, he slipped up. He could be touched. I mean, we saw what happened with Rahman, and he was definitely slowing down by the end. But at his peak, dude, he would be a tough night for anyone in history. So yeah, I would choose him over Langford. But to say that Langford wouldn't have an out and out chance, no, there's no way having it. Like you said, dude, Langford knew how to fight big guys. He had fought big guys bigger than him his entire career, like his contemporary Barbados Joe Walcott. And they usually thrived on bigger guys because they were faster than them and they knew how to just get in them and just whoop some ass on them. You know what I mean? These big dudes would go in there and try swatting down at a flying. And these guys would come in, pop, 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 and just take the ass out. So to say that Langford would look at a guy like Lennox Lewis and think he couldn't tear him up would be like, very wrong. Like he definitely would have the confidence to do that. So good call.
Well, it's all about having fun. It's all about the discussion. So some people might hear that and be like, come on, this is some bullshit. I don't know, man. I don't know. Just saying.
Hey, man, I got iced by smaller guys in fight night, all right? While I was Lennox. So,
Every so often, I come on. We all know we're going to be iced by smaller actual fighters,
and
so
if
it
you
can
were going to
happen.
put a head to head between Sam Langford and Oliver Mccall, or Sam Langford and Hasim Rockman, I'm going with Langford.
That's for sure, dude. That's
So,
for sure.
yeah.
Who do you got at light heavyweight?
Light heavyweight, that was another one I was thinking of earlier. And, a couple of episodes back, we were talking about the Superman of my childhood, Roy Jones. So I'm going to put Roy in there because he was always a part of a lot of mythical matchups, especially in the early 2000s, where people were talking about him being the GOAT. So, how about him against the person that most people consider the GOAT of light heavyweights, Ezra Charles?
All right. Yeah. Damn, that's a good one, actually.
It's a really good, yeah. It's
A lot of people, I mean, I guess I kind of agree, but I don't know the reason why. A lot of people
why he's
say,
the greatest light heavyweight, or
well, no, a lot of people say that. No, I know why a
oh
lot of people say why Ezzard's the greatest. He probably is the greatest light heavyweight. That run that he went on at light heavyweight, even without winning the titles, like it's like just all time great after all time great after all. Even at middleweight,
yes,
Charlie Burley, he was like what, like 18 or 19, and he beat Charlie Burley.
he was still in high
What?
school. He was beating up as when he was
Yeah,
beating up.
he had. It
Before.
was. It was. I think either the first of I want to say two fights, and it was the next day he was graduating high school.
Yeah,
Anyway, I mean that's nuts. But the day after I graduated high school, I probably just went fucking smoked weed. But in any case,
Sterling was not going in the ring with Charlie Burley and Ezra
no,
Charles. I was in high school,
not
man.
at all.
I was still in my jazz band. Um, I was training at the gym, but probably getting my ass kicked in sparring. I definitely was not getting ready to fight the baddest light heavyweights on the
No,
planet. I was
yeah,
avoided by the rest
just
of the world.
insane. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so
Charles goes in there, beats a guy up, and then goes to math class the next day for a test.
yeah,
Sure.
so I definitely understand why people would say he's the greatest, but I think that a lot of people believe, a lot of like history types who talk about Roy Jones, now believe that he ducked most punchers in the divisions that he was in going up to light heavyweight. And I mean, he didn't fight them. I don't know that he ducked them, but he didn't fight them. Even Darius Michalczewski was a puncher. And I mean, he wasn't the greatest fighter, obviously, and I would have picked Roy over him for sure, as most people would have. But it's like you can't give him. I've talked about this recently. You can't give him the credit for a fight he didn't fight. So I mean, I do. So I have questions. You know what I mean? Like even Roy at his peak, it's kind of like, what happens if somebody like really catches him? And we got questions, like I think rightfully so, and especially with somebody like Ezra Charles, dude. A lot of it gets kind of lost in his heavyweight title bid because he was a good heavyweight champion, but not a great heavyweight champion because by that time he was already like his greatest days were at light heavyweight, and he was not a big heavyweight whatsoever. So I think that that's why this is a really good matchup because at light heavyweight, that's where Ezra Charles is at his best, and he could really punch at light heavyweight.
Dude, he was vicious, man. Like the photos of him just annihilating Moore and the book, I mean, Springs Toledo, his book on Black Murderers Row, Charles is mentioned completely throughout the book. And one of the few guys that was able to have his number is my personal favorite from that group, not Holden, excuse me, Lloyd Marshall. Marshall was able to beat him up in his first fight, and then Charles came back and just, like, thrashed him in the rematch. But the reason why I love Marshall, you've talked about it, he seemed the happiest dude out of the group. The way he fought in the ring, he'd bounce off the ropes, sometimes so theatrically that the referee would issue a count before he realized that Marshall was bouncing off to go attack again and shit like that. Like he was so cool. And dude, Charles, the thing about it is that, like, the reason why I'm going to lean to Ezra Charles in this fight is that Roy Jones is such an anomaly and his reflexes were so great and so good and all that. But there was still, there's layers to his game that we realized that he just didn't have as he got older, that someone like Bernard Hopkins and others were able to pick up because Roy relied so much on his reflexes. Excuse me. And just being so quick, quick twitched and fast that he didn't have to rely on just, like, working, doing things that were just basic that you just learned in the gym. And of course he knew how to do that, but like he didn't do it for so many years, and the style was so predicated on just being so quick and just boom, 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 and taking guys out and all that. That by the time he gets older, it's none of that's even there, and he's still trying to be the Roy Jones of young. And if you watch the fights, even in his prime, there was ways to exploit his style. Like, he had to have the certain right guy to do it. Most guys couldn't do it, and even if they were able to do it briefly, they ended up losing. But for brief moments, you saw there was, people able to exploit him. Guys like Montel Griffin, who we talked about, gave him absolute fits in their first fight. And who was his trainer in that fight? Eddie Futch, right?
Eddie Futch, yeah.
Where is Eddie Futch from? Eddie Futch is from the Ezra Charles era.
Yeah, and even Eric Harding gave him some trouble too.
I was going to say, yeah, Eric Harding for the first 4 or 5 rounds before his shoulder gave out was giving Roy the business.
Well, and that's the kind of fighter that Roy did seem to have issues with, or seemed to have more issues with, is like the fellow counter punchers who could, had pretty good speed or pretty good timing. And that's, stylistically, there's no actual formula. I know that a lot of people talk about that. Well, like, timing beats speed, but like power beats, blah, blah, blah. There's no actual formula that works.
Okay.
Like, and it does, there are openings for it, but generally speaking, when a fighter is relying on the reflexes and stuff like that, and that explosive speed and power, a lot of the time timing can beat that kind of stuff. And if they're a really well-schooled fighter like a Montel Griffin, unfortunately he just couldn't punch. If he could punch more, Roy might have been in trouble. If Eric Harding's bicep or whatever it was had held up, Roy, I don't know if he'd been in trouble, but he was definitely not having his way in that fight. He was having more trouble than usual. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if you put somebody like Ezra Charles in there, where there is that extra element of he could also hurt you, yeah, I'd probably lean Ezra Charles, dude.
Totally. I think it would be I think, though, you know what? It would just be fascinating because Roy definitely would have success. I mean, even back then, Roy probably would have been faster than anyone of that time period, faster than Burley, who was extremely quick, faster than Lloyd Marshall, faster than, any of the light heavyweights, black or white fighters that you can imagine. Like, we've never seen anybody like Roy Jones since he was in his prime, or even really before that. We've had guys very close to him, in style and stuff like that. But just in terms of his overall, like, Roy's always been just kind of one of his own, and that's what makes him so unique and special, especially for fans like us who kind of grew up with him. But if we're not just awed by the whole style that he had, like a lot of fans were back then, and you realize, hey man, there are holes to his game that can be exploited, and eventually were, you realize that guys from the past who just kind of had an overall of everything, like Ezra Charles, would just, probably would come out on top, but would have some difficulty in doing so.
Yeah, he just wouldn't have been as in awe of it or as impressed by it.
Absolutely not, man. I mean, he just would have digested a few rounds, taking in what he had to do, and then once he started turning up the heat, as we know, Roy always struggled on the ropes. Charles would have ate him up over there. He started with a jabbing with him. Roy had trouble with guys who would jab with him, and
you just need to download the data.
That's it. Yeah, Lomachenko style.
He just needed to matrix his way through that fight,
Dude, it's.
I won't get you going.
You know how I feel about that, Pat. Can't stand downloading data and the spams that come along with it and proclaiming all kind of just for that, when we get to featherweight, I'm gonna have Lomachenko fight Sandy Sadler so we get annihilated. I'm just kidding. Go on.
Oh fuck yeah, Sandy's gonna line him up with a jab and bop.
You know what Sadler would have done to that poor guy? Oh my god! If you think Salido was bad to him, fans, imagine what a dude like Sandy.
When they had that little not to take it out into left field, dude, but the other day during the Shakur Stevenson fight, they had this little montage where they're talking about the lightweight division, and they're like, they refer to Lomachenko as the Grand Master, and I'm like,
did they really?
But there's a fucking champion. Did they mean the Grand Dragon? Or
maybe they were referring to Bobby Fischer, Eric Kasparic. I don't know.
I don't know, man.
Whatever. But
I
Instead of
didn't get it.
dwelling on that twerk, let's talk about what's
Yeah.
going on.
So light heavyweights. I had a matchup that I thought was pretty fun. At the very least, we know for sure that one of the two fighters, if not both of them, would have made it fun because they both had a propensity for getting hit and for hitting super fucking hard. And that was Matthew Saad Muhammad and Archie Moore.
Yes. Oh man, that fight would have been awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, it would have been like bombs away one way or another because Saad would not have let that shit go quietly. And Archie Moore, he could be touched, he could be floored, he could get pissed off and then come back with his hair all fucked up and like trying to fucking beat you up. Yeah, so I mean, it would have been fun.
Well, think about it, man. More, dude. Has there been a lot of books written on Moore? With all the things written about Ali over the years and all the documentaries dedicated to him and a few other fighters, like Tyson, which, my God, that Hulu shit. And like,
I'm not watching it, but I saw some screen caps and nah.
yeah. But you get what I'm saying is all the
Yeah.
screen time dedicated to all these different guys. There really needs to be something put on Archie Moore, man, whether it's a documentary or something, because my God, what a fascinating life that man had. Like, are you kidding me?
And fought for forever and like just, lived through so fucking much. Like,
Yes,
wowza.
absolutely. Like an incredible life, man. Like the guy turned pro in the mid 30s. His career ended in what, like 1963, and his first pro fight is against a guy named Piano Man Jones. His last pro fight is a professional wrestler named Mike Dibiase. And if that name doesn't ring a bell, his son is the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase. And then think about everything that happened in between that. Like you said, he was a part of Black Murderers Row somehow. And if he gets a light heavyweight title shot at a time when most people's careers would have ended years ago, and not only does he win that, he ends up having one of the most prolific reigns in light heavyweight history, to where today we're talking 70 something years after his reign, he's still recognized today as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, light heavyweight in history. Just a fast, and then you go about all, you look into like his record for all the knockouts that he scored and his overall, body of work, and then his philosophies on life, his training habits, all this other stuff. The fact that he was training George Foreman and George Foreman became like a kind of a version of him coming back and being the old dude. Like, shit's crazy, man. Archie Moore is the most fascinating guy ever. Sorry.
He really was, dude. And he was a really great fighter too. That I know that he scored a shitload of knockouts. We've talked about shit like this before, where we know a lot of his knockouts were over straight up scrubs or were fights where like, dude, who knows if it was fixed? Who knows what was going on? Who knows if this person was even an actual fighter? But like I've always said before too, even if you knock out 100 scrubs, dude, that shit still takes skill. That's still 100 fucking scrubs. Like, and I mean, the proof is in the pudding too, because we have video. We can watch him fight, and he was a truly great fighter who, even though he scored the knockouts, though his skill probably gets underrated because he was a really, really smooth stylist, and he was the kind of guy who set up those punches. He was a good combination puncher too. So there's a lot about him there's a lot to like, from a personal standpoint and as a fighter too. Really, really good fighter. But he had weaknesses. He was not super difficult to find, and because he was a puncher, he had to get in there and land his own punches. He could be hit.
And his chin wasn't the greatest either. He could be decked. He could be out hustled. And he clearly, like I said, like as smart as he was, and he was past his prime. Like he was still an old man. And the light heavyweight division that he was in at that point, like there was some names that he had fought, like Harold Johnson and a few others, but like he just, if you found a prime guy that was able to like really drill him, like he could be dropped and hurt, like Yvonne Durrell, which one of the greatest fights of all time. How old was Moore in that fight?
Oh man, I want to say he was like 39 or something. Like, I
I
mean,
think he was even older. I think he was in his 40s by
he
that
might
point.
have been like,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I
Like
think he
literally,
was.
like you said, graying at the sides and everything, gets dropped a number of times early. He has to rally back and stop a guy like Durrell. But in all essence, Durrell was just a crude slugger. There was nothing really like finessed and like really exciting about him. And he was able to get to Moore and touch him up and drop him a number of times. So it's not inconceivable to think a guy like Saad Muhammad wouldn't be able to do the same. But the thing about Moore, like you said, man, not only was he really crafty, he had good recuperative powers too. He could still last. He knew what he was doing in the ring, and there wasn't anything he had never seen before. And he used that his oldness to his advantage, like that whole hypnotist shit that he would do, because he would always be talking to his opponents, you know. And more than one guy that was interviewed after fighting Archie Moore over the years would always say the same thing. They saw him, they would look across the ring. He looked old. He'd hunch over, you know, probably on purpose to make himself look even more pronounced, right? He was graying at the sides. He was always in shape, so you can't say he was flabby or anything, but like he had surgery on his stomach for a couple of operations that he had. So he had like some jagged scars that are very visible over there too that add to his whole thing. And you're looking at him, he's like, man, this guy's an old heap. Like, the fuck, are you kidding me? I'm going to stomp this guy to death. I'm surprised none of these other guys could have done it. You know, this is going to be easy work. And so you go out there in the first round, and they said, you know, Moore would go there and like he would just be really relaxed, and he had the cross arm defense, the same one that Foreman perfected years later. And that's what made him touchable too, because even though that defense does work in terms of taking punishment, like you can be touched up with it. And so these guys are working. Moore's in.
And they were but they were always doing the same. They were always moving forward and down too. Like there wasn't a whole lot of like side to side shit. It was like, dude, you bad.
Like Ken was a variation. He wasn't completely cross-armed. He did like a weird crab thing, and he did have like more side to side movement with his butt. Moore and Foreman, especially Moore, like because that was his thing, and as he's doing it, he'd be talking, oh yeah, kid, you're doing great. Oh yeah, nice shot, man. Keep on going. Wow, you're gonna be the next champ of the world. And then all of a sudden, because he gets you in a lull and you're feeling good, then he'd be like, stop. And you stop, and he would take your ass out. But we're talking now, if you want to put the Moore that's like around, I want to say the Maxim fight against the Saad Muhammad at, where would you say his peak was at? Probably around the first Marvin Johnson fight, maybe.
Yeah, because even though like the Yaki Lopez, that was like great fights, but he was already starting to kind of slide a little bit, you know. He'd already been touched up by then.
Yeah. I think Moore comes back to rally. Moore gets dropped early, he gets rocked a lot. It's a back and forth battle, and Moore stops him super late. So I can't see that fight going the distance.
Nah, I don't either.
Like round 13 and 14, an absolute war. Moore takes it.
It's probably something. It's probably a fucking bloodbath with Saad Muhammad getting cut once or twice, but Moore refusing to quit. Yeah, that would be a bloodbath, and I'd probably go with Archie too. But I mean, I wouldn't be confident about it.
No, that's a good call. That would have been an awesome fight.
Who do you got for middleweight?
Middleweight, man. You know, it's a couple of bulls, man. A couple of guys that just one from the turn of the century, and then one that was raging. So I'm talking Jake LaMotta against Stanley Ketchel.
Okay, all right. That's an interesting fight, dude. Because I mean, it's like, you know, Jake LaMotta obviously soaks up a lot of punishment, or that was kind of his MO, was his ability.
He wasn't no slugger either. Yeah, he was more of a crouching boxer, like very active, but you know, had a good jab and everything. And
and threw a lot of punches, but like was not the kind of fighter who was going to be like, you know, he definitely wanted to like dictate. You know what I mean? He wanted to press the fight, but so was Stanley Ketchel. So there'd probably be a lot of fucking mauling in that fight, actually.
There would be, man, a lot of headbutting and mauling, but I think it would I don't know, man. It would be brutal. I'm not sure how like pleasing it would be to watch on TV, because like you said, it would be a lot of inside. If the referee just kind of lets them go, then it could be really interesting, because it would be grueling. You know what I mean? And
all right, so here's what happens. Frank Cappuccino's the referee. Yeah. He starts calling Stanislaw, and then he starts and he's calling Jake Jacob. Yeah. Jacob, let go of his head, Jacob. Come on, Jacob.
What are you doing? Yeah.
Stanislaw, I don't like the way you're hooking him. Come on.
But the thing about Ketchel, and yes, he's a part of that era where there was like a lot of mauling and everything like that. But if you watch him, and there are a lot of thank God there have been historians out there that have been able to fix up some of the tapes that have been, you know,
and don't hoard them to themselves. Yeah,
exactly. and they reformat them and readjust them for the modern era, that like they're back in like more or less the same speed that they should be. They're not sped up, they're not anything, and you can get a better sense of how they fought. And Ketchel, even though he still is a little wild, very wild, and like, you know, his style is more so for that era as opposed to what you would see decades on. You can still see like the finesse that is there with him. Like his feet are always in place for everything that he throws. There is purpose for what he's doing, and every punch that he kind of goes with, he can like go and be flowing enough to land another combination. And he hit hard enough. He was ferocious enough and smart enough with his placement that like he kind of raised himself a little bit above his contemporaries before the wheels started falling off, before his untimely murder in what was it, like 1910 or so. So it's like it would be interesting, man. And not only that, like I think his physical strength, considering the era that he fought in, where he was obviously fighting guys bigger than him a lot of the times or smaller, and he was known as like a strong guy who just was able, that a lot of people weren't able to like hold off. And Lamotta wasn't known as a guy that was bullying and stronger than most people. It would be interesting to see a fighter that Lamotta probably wouldn't have the strength advantage over like that.
Yeah. And on top of that, dude, I mean, there is something to be said, at least in terms of toughness and endurance, for fighters who are going 45 fucking rounds, bro.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, any way you slice it, even if it's 45 rounds of mauling, like that wears it out. That wears you out. Like that's not just 45 rounds of doing nothing. So, I mean, any fighter that's able to go, you know, whatever, above 15, 20, 25 rounds, that kind of shit, um, they're obviously on a different level in terms of endurance. And so this would definitely be war of attrition type of shit, I would imagine. And damn, I don't know. I mean, I would probably go with Lamotta just because he fought like, or he beat the better fighters, but like not by a ton though. Like that's the thing, is like not, yeah, I don't know, dude. I don't know. I mean, maybe Lamotta, but that's tough.
I'm thinking split decision. Like it would be a close fight, and I wouldn't consider it be like, oh, it's gonna be one of the greatest fights of all time. No, it would be just a bloody, brutal, grueling fight between two bulls that just kind of come together and are mauling a lot. But like, referee's going to be continuously yelling at them. Probably some points are going to be taken for low blows and headbutts and various things, because Ketchel had no problem, especially for the era that he came from, giving the business to whatever he needed to do. Yeah. I mean, the guy sucker punched Jack Johnson, for God's sake. Right?
Yeah, if the rumors about him, you know, double crossing Jack Johnson or whatever are true, then I mean, you got some fucking balls, dude.
He really did. I'm still, that's, and you can kind of like, you can kind of like believe it too, because like if you watch that fight, if you actually have the patience to watch that, they're just kind of going about it where it looks like they kind of, you know, kind of what would you say, like agreeing with each other, right? They're just, you know,
yeah, really what Teddy Atlas calls the silent contract.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, until there's a lot of locking up and a lot of like pushing, and yeah.
Until Ketchel finally decides, you know what? Hey, anyone looking? By the way, bow, bow. Yeah. And Johnson kind of like the fuck. It looks up.
Like, oh, okay. Are
you serious? Really? Oh, all right, bet. Gotcha.
Yeah, and then just hammered him.
And then walks to the corner.
Yeah, brushes his fucking face off of his glove.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that would be an absolutely brutal fight. So I mean, I'd probably
I think it would go the distance.
But
Ketchel's not getting knocked out by Lamotta, and
no, probably
Ketchel,
not.
as strong as he is, he's not taking out Lamotta, because Lamotta's proven himself to probably have the most granite chin ever. And yeah, I think Lamotta wins it by a point or two, but it's just going to be a hard fight to score. It's going to be a fight that a lot of people are going to go back and forth on, and both guys are going to go to the hospital with deformed faces afterwards for either their heads and for the punches inflicted, as well as their various other, you know.
Yep. Things. Probably, yeah. All right, I got a good one. At least I got one that I think is good.
Let's hear it.
They're not from two different eras, but it's a fight that many people felt should have happened or wanted to happen. Mm-hmm. And personally, I think that it might not be one of the fighters' like best divisions, because Mike Mccallum's division might be junior middleweight instead of middleweight, but I ain't gonna argue too much. Still, I'm saying marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Mike Mccallum.
Oof.
I mean, I think the level of skill in there is underrated for
Yes.
sure. But I mean, they both could definitely fucking clobber. They both could get in there, dig to the body. You know, they both
You can
were,
bang, 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 bang,
yeah,
bang, bang,
dude,
bang.
good technicians, but just power punchers too. That shit would have been fucking just, mwah.
Well, yeah, when people were like, "Oh, was Mccallum really a big puncher?" Okay, watch his fight with Donald Curry. Watch what he did to poor Julian Jackson, because he did to Jackson what Jackson did to everyone else after that. But
Exactly.
you know, yeah, man, Mccallum. Look, we go back and there's a lot of people, especially on boxing Twitter over the years, people that don't know any better have like gotten the notion that Mccallum was ducked by literally everybody of the 80s from heavyweight to flyweight. And that's not the case. Was Mccallum ducked? Yes. All right. Like Duran had the option to fight him, and Duran was like, you know what, I'm good on that. I'm going to move up to fight more, Hearns, which was more lucrative. Was Hearns actively looking to fight him? No. But when people say like, oh yeah, Marvin Hagler ducked Mccallum, that is utter nonsense. Okay. Sugar Ray Leonard ducked Mccallum. No, that was nonsense too. Leonard wasn't even really active during that time. All right. I think he was
Yeah.
retired. And the only time he came back when Mccallum was champion was to fight Hagler, and then he retired promptly again. So that's gone. Hagler was a middleweight nearing the end of his career when Mccallum first became junior middleweight champion in 1984 85. So you think Hagler was actively looking for a guy like Mike Mccallum? By the time this happened, Hagler was looking for Hearns. He was looking for Durant. He was looking for the Leonards. Like, he was looking for big challenges. Mccallum wasn't going to do anything for him. So keep that in mind. Regardless of all that, Mccallum still was one of the most supremely gifted fighters of the era, improved a years long as a eventual Hall of Famer. Everything. The guy was just incredible, and skill wise, yes, he would have been able to hang with Hagler, which a lot of guys at that time wouldn't have been able to do. Man, Hagler was just a beast. Whether it was him just putting the pressure on you and knocking you the fuck out because you just couldn't handle the heat, or if he had to box you like he did with Duran, he could do that too. Man, he was very versatile, one of the greatest switch hitters in history. And all that said, I think he just would have been a little bit too much for Mccallum altogether. Still, it
Yeah.
would have been a good fight and beautiful boxing by both, man. Mccallum would have had his moments and definitely could have tagged Hagler, because Hagler could be touched. It wasn't like, he was Mr. Defensive. But when it just comes down to it, I think Hagler just surges and wins like a competitive, close, but clear decision.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think that would have been really fun and great to watch. And
Yeah.
then somewhere around like, assuming this is like a 15 round fight, probably
Not
something like around 8, 9, Hagler starts to take over. Like he starts to kind of, you know, put the
yeah.
motherfucking, starts to lay the wood down,
Mccallum is
dude.
still with him. Like, I think he still hangs with him, but there's a clear difference. And
Yeah,
then, yeah,
starts to separate a little bit. And then I mean, I'm not even saying necessarily he stops him, because Mike McCallum also was tough as shit, tough as
he
fucking
had an
nails.
incredible chin too, as well.
But I mean, I think that Hagler was just a little bit better and could do more things just a little bit better, and just
Yeah.
was a fucking hard man, dude. The kind of guy who, not sure you would have been one to take no for an answer in a fight like that,
Dude, I mean, the reason why the fans love Hagler as much as they do, and he's been adored as much as he has been over the years, is because of his take no prisoners attitude, what he had to come through, his hard scrabble, coming up from his career, never leaving the Petronelli brothers, being denied over and over and over, first title fight getting denied, going to England, beating Alan Minter, which I think that just celebrated that's anniversary. What was that, yesterday? And immediately after the fight, getting pelted with beer bottles by stupid racist fans in England. Um, Still trying to gather his respect throughout the middleweight range, just ravaging one dude after another while clamoring for a big fight. Finally, the welterweights and junior middle, they start moving up and challenging him, and he has to defend his title again. Like, you, yeah, man, Hagler is the ultimate. Just another one too that just deserves, like, when you think about it, when you want to make a documentary on somebody, where's the Hagler documentary? Where's the Hagler movie?
Yeah, I don't know,
Actually,
man.
don't make a Hagler movie. Most boxing movies are trash. Where's the Hagler documentary?
Yeah, yeah, seriously. I don't know what these production companies are doing or how they're picking their stories, but stop
God
making the
knows who
same
they would pick
ones.
for Hagler mm, as
Stop
an
making
actor
the
for
same
that.
ones, bro.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
so many fighters.
So
All
good
right.
one. Yeah.
What about welterweight?
Welterweight, I have a fun one. Um, Another one because the anniversary of his fight was the other day. Sugar Shane Mosley when he annihilated Ricardo Mayorga. So Sugar Shane Mosley against Mickey Walker.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Like
you're like, wow, that's okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like welterweight Shane, like for a minute there, like
I'm talking Shane when he fought Oscar De La Hoya the first time. So we're talking 2000 Shane.
Yeah, and he looked real good. I mean, the whole power boxing deal, Jack Mosley and his whole. I mean, and I do think that he was onto something with that too, though, because I mean, it was more. I think a lot of people during the time almost associated that with almost like Tybo or some shit, where it was like, like, oh, you're more into like the fitness of boxing and shit like that, and you guys aren't really talking so much about techniques. But he was, and he was obviously, Shane Mosley's style of kind of like coming in wide, but doing it on purpose, and like punching in combination, but punching in like these kind of sweeping, like combinations that were like fluid, but like, really powerful and stuff like that. Yeah, dude, he obviously was at his peak a really good fighter that was good with like reflexive kind of boxing and shit like that. But obviously Vernon Forrest, and to a degree a couple other fighters too, like yeah, I remember even Adrian Stone, dude, before the knockout, they were talking all sorts of like shit before the knockout on the commentating, and then it was like, whoa, like he got laid out so bad.
Bro, that was such a nasty knockout, man. He did poor Adrian Stone nasty.
Yeah, dude. And Adrian Stone wasn't even like a bad fighter or anything, but oh my god, he just got annihilated.
Man, Stone was a good like lower end contender for the era. Clearly wasn't going to be an elite guy, but he was a tough guy. And and Mosley just treated him like a trash bag.
Oh. Yeah, like he was kind of like just measuring him for a couple of rounds or something, but at his best, yeah.
That's what I love about Mosley is that, like, unlike other fighters, other elite fighters, Mosley didn't take his time with guys that didn't deserve to be in the ring with him. Like, if you didn't have no business being in the ring with him, he would take your ass out quickly and do it like, with a vengeance. Guys like him, when he first moved up to welterweight, his first fight was against Wilfredo Rivera. And Rivera fought a who's who of that era and gave everyone hell. And Mosley was the first one that was able to stop him. Sure, it won a bunch of rounds, but I mean, Rivera wasn't the type of guy they were going to take out quickly, anyways. And then Willie Wise, who had just come off of a decision over a shot Chavez, that was the Mosley. That's what I mean. Mosley just thrashed him, man. Wise, poor guy who was feeling a career high after beating Chavez and couldn't punch himself, but had decent skills, gets thrown into a main event HBO slot with a Rampage and Mosley, who's trying to get a De La Hoya fight in.
Yeah, he's Mosley, like, all right, I'm making my name off you now, buddy.
Yeah, like Mosley treated him like a chew toy, And after he beats Oscar, same thing. The Antonio Diaz, who, poor guy too, man, because like he most of the time now he was fighting at junior welterweight at that point in the early 2000s, and making his name beating most of the guys at junior welterweight. Is hey, fight Shane Mosley at welterweight for the championship when he finally gets the pay dirt, and you're like, really? So of course Mosley blasted him, and then Adrian Stone was just, him and Mickey Walker would have been a good style clash.
It definitely would have, dude, because you want to talk about fighters whose style, like from back in the day, 20s and 30s, whose styles actually do hold up just fine. Mickey Walker is another fighter whose style holds up just fine. Because I mean, there's something to say for aggression. You know what I mean? Like aggression doesn't get old. Aggression doesn't. Obviously, there's different ways. And we talk about like those collisions and clinch fighting and shit like that, and different things that are allowed, that were allowed then that aren't allowed now, et cetera, et cetera. We know about all that, but there are other fighters. Sam Langford was one of them. Mickey Walker is another, who were smart enough to get around that type of shit. Like whatever it was the referee was going to allow, they were going to figure out. Whatever rules they were fighting under, they were going to figure it out, because they were either that skilled or that aggressive or whatever. That was Mickey Walker. He was just a little dude who you could not deter. He was going to be on your fucking ass no matter what. And at welterweight, he was, if you look at photos of, like, I think I actually a little bit ago posted on the Boxing History account, posted a photo of him and Cowboy Paget, and you look at the size of Mickey Walker's legs, they're fucking huge. Like, and I mean, we're talking about obviously not like in the 1926 or whatever this is. These dudes not on fucking like Winstrol or anything like that. The guy was just had massive fucking legs, and that's why he was so tough to deter, because he'd fucking use his legs to get in there and just bore in and just
Yeah, there's no
punch you to fucking
PEDs,
death.
man. Walker worked on Jack Daniels and Pabst. You know what I mean?
Literally, he was
Yeah,
like, even in his book I have over here, that's like half of what he talks about is how much he was drinking during that time.
seriously. And you know what's interesting about Walker? I realized as a kid and grew to appreciate as an adult is that in mythical matchups, whenever they would, whoever was like the number one guy of a division back in the day, they would always like do an article comparing him how he would do against so and so's of the eras, right? And I remember the first one I read, Pernell Whitaker, how he would do against different guys from lightweight all the way to middleweight or whatever it was. And Mickey Walker was one of the first guys that they had him losing the fight against. And they said that Walker would have just like laughed at Whitaker's punches, walked through his defensive wile, and just kind of blasted him out after like in the middle of the late rounds and would have just stomped him out. And I think they had Walker beating Oscar De La Hoya. They've had Walker beating other guys. Like Walker is one of those dudes and the reason why I say this is because whenever they compare those eras, guys like Trinidad, De La Hoya, Whitaker, they always came out on top, usually against some of those guys from those eras. Walker was always one of the few exceptions that usually had him winning by a knockout or so. I'm not saying he would have knocked out Mosley. All I know is that he wouldn't have been awed by anything Mosley was doing. Walker clearly fought guys a lot bigger and stronger than him a lot of the times, even at welterweight. Even this was before he moved up to heavyweight and made that incredible, drive to the top before Max Schmeling derailed him. So you look at all these, these factors and stuff like that, and I have to kind of like go with Walker maybe on a close decision. I don't think he's going to knock Mosley out, but I think that he might beat him.
I think that, dude, that style, I mean, I'm not going to malign Purnell at all, but I think that Mickey Walker's style is really overwhelming for most other styles. He was very aggressive and very good at infighting and very good at like stifling an opponent. And there weren't a whole lot of fighters who figured out how to like tame that. And I mean, yeah, obviously with somebody like Shane Mosley, he was a really good puncher. So there's obviously the possibility that Walker could walk into something, and he could be hit too. But yeah,
Totally.
dude, I'd probably go with him. Just he more relentless, and I think a little bit more like Shane Mosley's looking more to pick his spots, and Mickey Walker's like not gonna let him type
Yeah.
of thing.
And Mosley too is not going to run away from him. Like he's going to go try to go like have a firefight with him. And he's faster than Walker, so you get some of the better of the exchanges. And I wouldn't be surprised if he even decked Walker once or twice. But like just overall, especially if it goes to like 15 rounds, Walker's just going to overwhelm him after a while. Just
And then
man, he was just grueling. The only guys that were able to keep up with Walker was someone like Harry Greb, who was just a bigger version of him and even more crazier than Walker. You know what I mean? And then from there, it was, like look at the success he would still have at heavyweight. Like he was able to score a draw with Jack Sharkey, who on most accounts, if you read it, Walker probably deserved the decision that fight. He beat other guys that were just like Bearcat White, who was a giant compared to him, and others. Like, Walker was fearless, just absolutely fearless guy. He went to light heavyweight, challenged Tommy Loughran. He challenged Maxie Rosenblum. Like, this is a dude that's like my
and a
height.
couple of those fights, most people felt he won at the time too.
Totally. This was a guy that was my height, you know. And by all accounts, he wasn't Mr. Training. He wasn't a Spartan for training, which most guys from that era weren't. So
Yeah, he just liked fighting. It wasn't even
yeah,
so much about, yeah, he just liked to fight. So it's like, all right, we're fighting next week. Cool. Yeah, I'd probably go with him too. It's not to like talk shit on Shane Mosley at all, but we're talking about Mickey Walker here.
yeah.
Mickey
It
Walker.
would be a hell of a fight. That would have been a fight of the year easily.
I'm gonna cop out a little bit on this welterweight because I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm giving in a little bit to the masses here. I'm
Okay.
going Ray Robinson versus Ray Leonard.
I mean, that's the fight. Look, bro. Everybody always wants to put those two together. It's easy enough, and like, you know, that's yeah.
I mean, dude, it's I think that a lot of people are going to be jumping real quick to say Ray Robinson, and I get it. That's the consensus greatest of all time. I'm not going to argue against that because it depends on which boxing history circle you're in, because some people are going to be like, no Greb, no Langford. Most I think are going to say Robinson, but like I'm not going to argue. So I'm not going to argue the tendency to just automatically go Ray Robinson. I'm just saying that at their peaks, and at their best, I don't think you should sleep on Ray Leonard.
Fuck no. Oh my God, no. Are you kidding me?
Just saying.
Think about this too, man. Like, look, Robinson's considered the GOAT at welterweight, and deservedly so. He's considered the GOAT by many, just of all time, pound for pound. But Robinson was still like as great as he was, as fluid as he was, the supreme boxer. He could still be touched. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't, like he was an aggressive fighter. He wasn't just like a sit back boxer too. Like he was aggressive, as most guys were that era. Like he would go in there and want to fight you too, and he could be touched, and he didn't mind being touched so he can get his punches in there. He wasn't a slugger where he was gonna like take 3 to get 1 or anything like that. And he was obviously very defensively well, but he didn't mind getting hit. And Leonard clearly could hit and knew how to box and stuff like that too. Like their skills are very, very evenly matched at that point. Leonard at his absolute peak and Robinson at his peak at welterweight are just, and you imagine your 2 favorite things and mesh them together like peanut butter and jelly or any other type of like perfect combination, and that's what you got with those 2. Hence why Leonard had his nickname. Like they just kind of perfect, and man, like Robinson would have to really pull himself on that fight. Like dudes with lesser skills and just overall, lesser fighters than Leonard gave Robinson fits at welterweight. Can't go wrong. You can't think that Robinson had his way with every single welterweight and every single fighter that he ever fought before, like the prevalent footage that we saw in middleweight. Like Tommy Bell was able to drop him on his face before Robinson got up, was able to beat him on a decision to win the welterweight championship. He struggled in other fights. Artie Levine, I don't know if that was at middleweight or at welterweight, but Artie Levine was a monster puncher who almost knocked Robinson completely out before Robinson was able to rally and stop him himself. Like there's instances there. So to say this would be an out-and-out victory because Robinson's considered the GOAT is just absolutely wrong. All that being said, I don't know, man. I would
see. It's tough.
It's tough. It's really, really tough, man. Because here's the thing: like, if you put them, if they fought every day for 1 week, and there's 7 days in a week, I would have to say Robinson wins 4 and Leonard wins maybe 3 or 3, 2, and 1. There'd be a draw in between there at some point. Like that's how I'm going to look. Like that's how close they are. Robinson wouldn't completely sweep him that whole time. Do I think he's just shit? Excuse me. But I think he's just slightly there, just slightly ahead of Leonard. Yes, slightly, ever so slightly. But out of anyone in welterweight history, and of anyone in welterweight history, including Floyd, including Jose Annapolis and others, I think Leonard gives him the toughest one head to head. Tommy Hearns,
it's tough, dude, because like also obviously with the obvious skill that Ray Robinson had and things that people had talked about, like even Joe Louis, one of the things that he had said about Ray Robinson was one of the great things about Ray Robinson was that he could knock you out going backwards. Like most fighters need to be going forward to knock you out, but he can knock you out going backwards and blah, blah, blah. But, we know about all that stuff and also how skilled he was. But there is more welterweight footage than we'd previously thought, because the old line is that like, oh, we don't even have video of him in his prime. Well, we actually do have video footage of him fighting at lightweight and welterweight. There is some, but it's not as much. However, we don't have quite as much to say. Like Ray Leonard was like sadistic. Like when he got a fighter hurt or when he wanted to finish a fighter, he was a mean bastard. And I don't know that Ray Robinson quite had that in him unless you pissed him off. He wasn't like, I don't know that it came like, and one of the things Ray Robinson said was that he didn't feel like he was a fighter. he felt like he was somebody who would like, he liked to dance, he liked rhythm, he liked music, and he wanted to be a performer.
Mm,
But it was just that he had like found his way, into fighting. And so that's what he knew. And I mean, obviously he was a fighter, but my point being more just kind of like that instinct. Ray Leonard seemed more like, and I don't know if it was his upbringing. I don't know if it was some shit that happened to him when he was younger. I don't know. All I know is that when he was in the ring, he seemed mean. And
yeah,
so that's another thing about Ray Leonard that I can't like, that I think goes for him in this fight, where if he starts to, get any sort of advantage, man, he's going to be a tough, tough guy to overcome. But yeah, I mean, I think the theme in these mythical matchups is generally that like the greater fighter, or the fighter that we rate as greater, is generally going to find the way to win. And that's probably here too. Ray Robinson just finds a way to win. They fight 7 times, yeah, I'd give him the advantage.
totally, totally. But yeah, man, that's just one of those topics that like people over the years, that was the main fight that people would always come up, who would win between Leonard and Robinson. Then Floyd came along, and then that became the main theme. Who would win between Floyd and Sugar Ray Leonard? Who would win between Floyd and Sugar Ray Robinson? Who would win between Floyd and Tommy Hearns? And out of all those fights, literally the worst stylistic matchup out of that is Tommy Hearns with Floyd, because Tommy Hearns would blast Floyd into another dimension in 5 rounds or less. So, sorry, Floyd, that would just absolutely happen. But
Punch your shoulder roll right off your right off your. Now that you mention it, I think I'm bleeding inside my chest.
Floyd would have a lot more success, in my opinion, and this is saying something. I think he would have more success against Sugar Ray Leonard and Sugar Ray Robinson than he would against Tommy Hearns, just because of the styles and the way the body and everything like that. Like Hearns is just an absolute nightmare for him. So, but
Yeah.
that's for lightweight, the move down another division for lightweight. I think I have a really interesting one here. The human windmill, Henry Armstrong against Carlos Ortiz.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a really good matchup, dude. That's a really good matchup
Yeah.
because, obviously Armstrong with the nonstop offense. And I mean, he could punch, but wasn't like a big puncher. It was more that he was,
No, he was just overwhelm you. Yeah.
But then Carlos Ortiz, more of like kind of a somewhat classic boxer puncher with a really good emphasis on the puncher, because the dude could fucking lay you out. That's a really good matchup, especially because it's like you almost got to figure out which division or whatever. And I think that Henry Armstrong probably faced and beat the best lightweights out of, especially that era, dude. 1930s lightweights. It's a tough era. Lou Ambers, Lou
Pedro Montanez. Yeah.
fucking like 9 different Lou's in there. Lou Tindler, no, it was earlier, but still. Anyway, I think, yeah, dude, that's a really good matchup.
It would be, man. And again, I think the styles, like you said, Ortiz was more of a boxer puncher, but like you said, emphasis, he can knock the hell out of you. He knocked the hell out of Sugar Ramos, knocked the hell out of the Filipino hero.
Flashy Lorde.
Flashy Lorde, that's it.
Oh, that shit was brutal.
Yeah. And a host of other fighters, man. Ortiz was insanely popular in the New York City area. You know what I mean? Like his type of popularity wouldn't be seen by the Puerto Rican fans. Would it be that would only be rivaled by a guy like, I would say, WWE champion Pedro Morales when he came in. The type of popularity that, like, if they see their hometown hero getting whooped up, fans would jump over the ring and try to stab the guy to death to try to save him. You know what I mean? Like Ortiz had just hugely popular. When I think it was before the second or third Ismael Laguna fight, Ortiz was set up where they had an open workout in Harlem or the Bronx, and the entire borough looked like just came out to watch him, And there's like a famous photo of like, the announcer and everything like that in there, and it's crazy shit. Like really, really good fighter. It's very, very popular of his time too. Mostly known as a lightweight champion, and rightfully so, because that was the division that he coveted and had more presence at that time, but also a very good junior welterweight champion too. But anyways, yeah, it's like fire and ice. Armstrong they called him, like windmill. They called him the human windmill for a reason, dude. Like he was incredible. Like I think, didn't they say it was because he had like a slower heart rate or something like that he was able to just like have like in wild stamina?
I've heard stuff like that, and I have absolutely no idea
Neither
how
did I.
true it was, but I mean, I mean, it's just the stats are unreal, dude. They're honestly unreal. Like being able to obviously hold world titles, like lineal, legitimate world titles in different divisions at the time. Even just that alone on the surface is really impressive. But then you add to it that he defeated actually, real life good fighters on top of that to win these world titles. And on top of that, almost defeated a fourth in Seferino Garcia to hold a middleweight title as well. Jesus,
Yeah, I
dude.
mean,
Like,
these are guys that beat Hall of Famers to win all their championships, right? Because Ortiz beat Delilio Lloyd to win the. Wait, no, he didn't. Excuse me. He knocked out Kenny Lane to win the junior welterweight title. So I think right.
yeah, and I think he would have made a defense over
He made a
Duilio,
defense
right?
against Lloyd. Yeah, he made a defense against Lloyd, but still, that's a Hall of Famer. And then he wins the lightweight championship against Joe Old Bones Brown, who's criminally underrated today. And
Yeah,
one of
dude,
the
he like
great fights.
ruled the division for like 8 years or something like that. Like,
As an older fighter as well. The reason why they
how
call
is
him
that a
Old Bones.
footnote? That's nuts.
Never talked about today. Really, like think about the last time you heard his name on Twitter.
Probably the
So
last time I posted something.
exactly, So, anyways, those like the credentials, and then you look at Henry Armstrong, Petey Sarin for the featherweight championship, um, Lou Ambers for the lightweight title, and Barney Ross, who was obviously at the tail end of his career, but still one of the all-time greats, probably a top 10 all-time great for the welterweight championship. So like these are amazing credentials you're talking about here. And then if you put their styles together, they would just mesh perfectly because Ortiz would definitely be having to hold off Armstrong, who's just going to be rampaging and trying to windmill him and take over and overwhelm him like he did with everybody else. Ortiz, though, had the power to get Armstrong to back up, too, like you said, especially that right hand that he had and just overall. And his boxing skills, like he was slick enough in there that he would just, his counter punching and everything, which he would be forced to do, would just, oh man, it would be brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, dude, that's a tough matchup. I mean, I think that I tend to probably go with like in those kinds of matchups, like the fighter who puts out the most offense, because I
Yeah,
mean, I don't see Carlos Ortiz knocking out Henry Armstrong. I mean,
absolutely not.
yeah, no, no offense to Ortiz. It's just that Armstrong was just a rough customer.
Well,
And
Armstrong was only stopped once early. Well, I mean, no, he was stopped, I know, by Fritzy Zebic, but he wasn't laid out. The only time I think he was laid out in his career was like his first pro fight as Melody Jackson when he fought a guy by the name of Ali Vano. So,
yeah,
Armstrong definitely proved his mettle. Plus, if you look at the injuries he sustained later on in his career, like, Lou Ambers, the nasty, gnarly cut where he was just guzzling blood in his mouth, stuff like that, you're not going to knock him out. No.
yeah, and against Zivic too, like he got absolutely bruised to shit, and a lot of that, who knows how much of that was even legit, like actual punches. So
Maybe
probably
20.
not a lot of it. But I mean, he was going to be absolute hell to stop or even to try to stop. But I mean, Carlos Ortiz probably wasn't going to get stopped or anything like that himself either. I'm guessing that he probably just gets taken to a decision where he loses a decision, to on offense.
Totally. That's how I see it. But I think it would be really close, like a really, really close fight and a lot of fans would watch it and think that Ortiz would get robbed. Like it would be one of those that I think there'd be a big debate where,
Yeah, don't put that fight in
like,
San Juan.
yeah, absolutely not. Don't put it. Well, if you put it in New York, put it at MSG.
Yeah,
Definitely, that would be huge at MSG.
that would be a lot of
That
fun.
would have been a great fight at MSG. And yeah, that's mine.
Well, talking about style matchups, I mean, that's the other kind of constant in these mythical matchups is like the weird style matchups and stuff like that I think are fun. And another good style matchup that I think also is between two all-time lightweight greats, and this is a real good lightweight all-time great topic of debate, and that is Roberto Duran versus Benny Leonard.
Hell yeah.
I mean, it's a great style matchup. You got a boxer puncher technician type against more of a pure boxer who can like punch a little bit, but definitely more of a pure boxer. It's
And what's the common denominator between the two?
Ray motherfucking Arcel.
There you go.
I mean, and he might have had a tough time choosing on that one. He was always partial to Benny Leonard, but That's
Benny Leonard was
another
a part of his era, so I get
and
it.
that's another crazy thing is that like for decades and decades and decades, Benny Leonard was considered like the gold standard for like
Yes.
pound for pound. Like, yeah, he might not have been the greatest, like he might not even been the greatest lightweight or whatever, but he's the greatest fighter that I ever saw. You know, the greatest, the most skilled fighter I ever saw. Shitloads of people who knew a lot said that for decades.
Well, Bud Schulberg, who was one of the prominent writers in history, and he wrote a very interesting article when he talked about as a kid. His dad was a big boxing fan and would always go to the fights to watch Benny Leonard, and he would always beg his dad to go watch, go to MSG with him. And his dad always told him no, blah blah blah. Kind of reminded me to a degree, obviously not the same level, but like me asking my dad when I was small to go to my uncle's house to watch the fights with him. You know, you're curious, you just want to see what it's all about, right? So after years and years and years and years, stuff like that, finally there was one time I forget who he was gonna fight. It was Richie Mitchell or one of them. I think it might have been. Was it Richie Mitchell? I think. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, one of the Mitchell brothers. So I had to. It might have been Richie Mitchell, I think. But that was the Schulberg said that his dad was going to take him to that fight, and that whole day Schulberg was said he was at school and he was telling his friends, "I'm going to go see the great Benny Leonard tonight." And yeah, and he was throwing punches and he was all hyped and he was like, freaking out, right? And they get in the cab. His dad tells them, "Oh yeah, get ready." Blah blah blah. They dress up. They get to MSG, and when they get to the gate, the guy looks down. And he was like, "What the hell?" He was like, "You have a kid with you?" And he was like, "Yeah, we're gonna go have seats." And he was like, "I can't let you." He was like, "There's no kids allowed in here. I'm not letting you bring a kid in." And the dad is like, "Are you serious?" He tried to pay the guy off. And the guy was like, "I can't let a kid in here. Like, we just can't do it." And so the dad's just like, he said Bud Schulberg starts like bawling because he realized he's not gonna be able to watch it. His dad, realizing the circumstance, threw Bud Schulberg in a cab, drove back to their house, dumped him off, and just ran back to MSG as quick as he could, you know, to catch the fight. And then
I would have done the same, bud.
we all would have. I mean, what are you gonna do at that point, right? Can't waste a ticket because your kid can't get in, man. Just bring them back home and go back.
I'll take you in a few years, kid.
Yeah,
Sorry.
man. I'll tell you about what happened. I'll buy you an ice cream next tomorrow or something. I'm sorry.
I'll
Like,
bring you back a program for 5
yeah.
cents.
So he said the next thing he came in and they told him all about the fight, how incredible it was, how Leonard actually got hurt, came back, rallied, stopped him, yada yada yada. But he said by the time he was finally able to see Benny Leonard live, and that was when he fought Jimmy McClarnon. And he was just like, I think he by that time his dad was still around, but he didn't even have the heart to tell him his dad what the result was. But that gives you an example. I'm just trying to say about, like you said, how people looked upon Benny Leonard back then. Like he was talked about in the hushed tones, man, by everyone from that era. Like they talked about Dempsey and others. Like they were just looked upon as like the gold standard, the all-time great. And if you even dared to besmirch their name, you were going to catch a knuckle sandwich by one of those old timers. How dare you?
Back when everybody was worshiping Dempsey
Mm-hmm.
and they were like introducing fighters into the ring, they'd bring Benny Leonard into the ring and be like, ah! That type of shit.
Of course.
So, he was obviously revered just because there are going to be people who listen in or watch and go like, Benny fucking what are you talking about? This is Roberto Duran we're talking about. I'm just saying, he wasn't just some scrub, obviously we
And
know
Leonard Style is another one that holds up. He was absolutely brilliant, man.
100%,
Brilliant.
100%. And we're talking about a technician like Duran, who at lightweight, was far more mobile, used angles far more than he did as he moved up in weight and was fucking around with his weight more, and getting out of shape in between fights more and more. Obviously, he was just far more snappy and mobile as a lightweight. And so that's dangerous from an offensive standpoint. But then you have somebody like Leonard who defensively and with his footwork could potentially deal with that. So
Yeah.
I mean that makes for a really, really interesting matchup.
And man, they both came from incredible eras when it comes to the lightweights. Like Leonard had to deal with guys like Lou Tindler, who's considered one of the greatest fighters ever, never to win a world title, and other contemporaries of that time, like Willie Ritchie, who's a former lightweight champion. Um, Richie Mitchell. Like there was a lot of Rocky Kansas. There was a lot of different. I'm missing a ton of different guys too, but just like think of like the body work that he had to do. And the only time that he really lost in that era is when he moved up to welterweight to fight Jack Britton, and that fight was shrouded in controversy because he knocked in a fight that was like it was already acting kind of funny to begin with, but Leonard was the favorite. He knocks Britton down, and after he knocks him down, goes over and hits him intentionally, kind of Roy Jones, Montel Griffin style. Britton goes down again and gets disqualified, and everyone's just kind of like, "Yeah, the fuck? What? Why?"
That was dude, and the reports on that fight are crazy too, because if you read the reports, they basically say that he literally was like, or at least going by the description, was like it was like over. Like it
Yeah,
was like shit was done, and he just was like, nah, fuck this. Just went over and bap. It was like,
and they don't understand it because like they're
what?
wondering did he lose his head because apparently he was getting outboxed earlier by a Briton who was one of the all-time greats himself and other stuff. But no, it just but to get to the point, man, Leonard rightfully so was considered probably the greatest lightweight at that point, and even through the different decades, like you had great lightweights that came up, like Ike Williams and others, man, who were just like legendary fighters. But like Leonard was that dude, and then but no one had ever seen anything like Duran when he came up in boxing when he came up. Like, I mean, even Ray Arcel had said that. Like, they were just like there was never a guy that was just born to fight like Duran was. I don't think we still have seen anything like him. Like he is probably the most natural fighter, just pure fighter we've ever seen. Just like, watching Duran is like watching, a live action movie, half horror film, half just like, live execution, whatever you just want to put it. Like you can't turn your eyes away from him. You know what I mean? Like it was just you just knew you were getting something with him. And that was the beauty of him is that like as much of a crazy raging animal that he was, and you just knew you saw it in his eyes, you saw the hatred, you saw that he's wanting to kill, you just saw the viciousness in him, the stuff he would say outside the ring after those fights, everything like that. It was what he did inside there and how beautiful it looked at, how fucking beautiful he was in the ring pulling it off. That you were just like, my God, like, this is Beauty and the Beast, like, because it wasn't just unrivaled, carnage. You know what I'm saying? Like, this dude could go in there and the way he was slipping and ducking and like he could just fight on the inside and parry and his counter punching and he was always in the right position to bang you out and just like dude, no one had seen anything like that, man. It was the most purest thing of fighting form that it was incredible. So a guy like Arcel, who had seen everything up until that point, did the smartest thing you could possibly imagine, which a lot of trainers wouldn't do because everyone wants to try to mold them into their own thing. He was like, this dude is a natural fighter. He's just born to do what he does. Don't fuck with his style. Just get him in the shape and just tweak his things a little here and there. Just, give him like a game plan, but don't mess with what he does because what he does is perfect for him. You know what I mean? Because like exactly. She said, watch Freddie Brown and stuff, and Freddie Brown would try to make him down. He's like, no, stop that. Like, don't do that with him. Just let him be who he is. You know what I mean? Because if you try to tame him, if you try to cultivate him into something that he's not, he's gonna rebel and it's not gonna work. Just let him be natural. And him being natural, look what happened.
There seems to be some debate among like the history types as to who specifically is responsible. Some people say Freddie Brown, some people say Arcel, but from what I've read, it's more what you describe, and it was like not so much a fight or anything in the corner, but it was that Arcel was trying to like do less, like that he was like you don't need to do anything with him, like you don't need to train him, you just need to like hone his skills, you need to like tame him, you need to try to fucking get him to do what he's supposed to do, and that was always the difficult thing with Duran. And if you look at the early newspaper articles and shit like that describing him, a lot of them is like the stuff that you're saying, animalistic terms, with like beast and ferocious and vicious, violent, and and it's legit because shit was scary.
It is, man. And so it came to the point where they, like you said, they was like, don't try to change his style so much because it's what works for him is perfect. Hone it in a little bit, but just get his ass in shape. Because as wild as he was in the ring, he was wild outside the ring. And there was many stories because Arcel at the time too, and this is true, Arcel wasn't in his training camp 24/7. Freddie Brown was the one that was with him from beginning to the end. And Arcel even told him that because Freddie Brown was like, Arcel was still working. Like, he was still half retired. When the time he got brought in to start working with Duran in the early 70s, he was out of boxing for decades after basically being booted out by the mafia and almost being killed.
Literally hitting the head with a pipe.
Yes, with a lead pipe, yeah, because he had the nerve to run his own promotional shows and television. And after they warned him a few times, someone walked up and conked him. So he went to a different business venture altogether, became successful in that venture. I think it was like selling metal products or something. And by the time Duran's manager was like, "Hey, can you look at my guy?" Yada yada yada. And he came back first working with junior welterweight champion Alfonso Peppermint Frazier, and then going with Duran. He was still like kind of going part time. So he brought in Freddie Brown, who was a renowned trainer himself, worked with tons of former champions in the past, and he was like, "Yo, just take care of him during training camp. I'll come in 3 weeks before the fight. We'll come up with a game plan and go from there." And that's how it always worked. But like you said, Freddie Brown was also a guy that was just really head on, always like, didn't take shit from anybody. And so those two used to clash all the time. Freddie Brown used to pack up his bags and leave. Duran would go chase him down the street like you see Rocky chasing Mickey and stuff like that. But regardless, man, it somehow it still worked and they became what's considered the greatest lightweight ever. But with that being said, here's the thing, Pat. Duran could be frustrated. Villamar Fernandez lasted 13 rounds and frustrated Duran in certain parts of that fight. Lou Bizarro lasted a long time in frustrating Duran in certain parts of that fight before he got stopped.
Yeah, he paid the price.
Very much paid the price. And his brother almost got beat up for it too. Edwin Viruet twice went the distance with Duran. And he made Duran struggle and made him look kind of bad a couple of times. All of those guys I would consider not on the level of Benny Leonard, clearly, in terms of just being the pure boxer and everything like that. You know what I mean? So Duran could be frustrated. He could be outboxed a little bit here and there, but I still think his overall being and his ferociousness would take over in a 15-round fight. I still think he comes through.
Yeah, and I think again with Duran too is just that, like the offense. It's really stifling. It's really tough to deal with, and in those
And he could just
spots.
knock your ass out too, man. He had one punch knockout power at lightweight if necessary. He just
You talk like if you watch like most fights, and we'll get to the next, I swear, in a minute here. But when you watch it, this is just fun with the Leonard and Duran shit. But if you watch most fights, there's a real rhythm to it. Like a lot of them are like you go, then I go, then you go, then I go, and then a lot of them have rhythms where it's like there are punches, there are sequences where like that one fighter is going to be safe or something like that. Like one fighter is not going to be punching. And a lot of fighters are able to figure out when to punch in those during those times, and Duran was one of those fighters where like he'd punch when you're not expecting it. You throw punches from angles you're not expecting. And that's the kind of thing that I think would probably take this fight with Benny Leonard. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's a good one, man. It's another one that like has been talked about. I'm sure Arcel was brought up, as who do you think would win a fight and all that. I don't think he ever really answered that, but like you said, he did mention Leonard probably was his personal favorite. And that goes back to when he first got into the sport. Leonard was everybody's favorite. He was like the golden boy. And I'm sure when Arcel was asked to train Leonard for Leonard's comeback, that was like the biggest honor in the world for him. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
The next one, a little bit off kilter, actually, I would think, but it would be an interesting fight nonetheless at going down to featherweight. Nassim Hamed against Sandy Sadler.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely envision Sandy Sadler, getting him in the full Nelson right into.
And just giving him a full-on suplex after that too.
Yeah, because Barrera did it, so I can definitely envision Sandy Sadler, dude. He was a bit of a dirty fighter himself.
This is the Nassim Hamed years before Barrera just dressed him and humiliated him. So we'll say the Hamed around the Steve Robinson fight, so around 1995.
Man, I mean that's two really good punchers. I mean, yeah, that's you know what, I'm gonna have to look because off the top of my head, I want to say Sandy Sadler was stopped like once.
But yeah, his second pro fight.
Or something like that.
Fight. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thankfully, I'm correct on that. He wasn't stopped like 15 times or something.
No, it was only in the third pro fight. Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like Nassim Hamed was ever like well, number one, he didn't fight the depth of talent that Sandy Sadler fought. So maybe if he had, he would have been stopped. But it's not like he got stopped either. So I mean, it's fair to say that. But we also saw Hamed down a lot. Like we saw him down a lot. We saw him hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, dude. I think Sandy Sadler, if he catches him just right, or if he catches just about anybody just right, might be taking a nap.
I say Sadler stops in between 4 and 5 rounds, but Hamed might hurt him and even like flash knock down him himself. Because like Sadler was never, Sadler had one of the greatest chins ever too. Like think about all the amount of fights that he had over the years, the amount of the great fighters that he fought over the years, and somehow he never was able to, like, he was only stopped in like his second, like very, very early in his pro career. And it's like you think about it now and you're just like, wow, man. But like Hamed had that type of power that was, no one had really ever seen anything like that beforehand. And no one probably, I don't think the division's really seen it since then. And, as polarizing as Hamed is, and especially today on boxing Twitter, Hamed kind of carries the stigma of just being an overrated, guy from the UK that ducked a bunch of people. And anytime he fought somebody good, he would get undressed. But no, that's not the case, man. All right. Hamed at his peak was, did things no one else had seen in that division at that time. Sure was totally wrong. His style was like, predicated on just his reflexes and being weird and awkward, but at least he had the power to back it up. And the thing is, even when he looked like he was off balance, he still had enough power to knock the absolute living shit out of you. And that's what he was doing to guys, man. Guys that no one had seen at that point, people at 126 just being stretched the way they were with their faces contorted, like they were just hitting the face with an aluminum bat. You know what I mean? And Hamed was doing this left and right to everybody. It was really, really brutal stuff. So he would go in there. Sadler would definitely come in there. He wouldn't be amused with what Hamed's doing, but as he tries to go in and crouch in, Hamed might catch him with some shit early on. And I'm sure Sadler would be backed up, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, well, like, let me back up and like try to readjust here really quick and take my time." But eventually he'd get in there, like you said. I think because he was a lot bigger too. And once he starts getting the
Oh man,
it starts.
yeah, he was massive.
Yeah, dude. Someone described him as a bunch of loosely hung fishing poles just kind of strung together. And it's probably a very good description. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude, he definitely looked like a stick figure for sure. Because he was just a gangly looking. But we've talked about the punchers that look like that though, dude. Dangerous, super dangerous. And I mean, it's
it would
just
be fascinating. It would be a fascinating fight
it
for
definitely would, and it would probably be explosive. It's just that, yeah, dude, I get those visions of Hamed in the his head bouncing around and shit. You can't be getting hit like that against a puncher like Sadler, or like a Bob Foster, somebody like you can't do that, dude.
And you got to
do
think,
that.
and also too, it might be interesting when the era of the eras of when the fight would take place. Because if the fight took place in
True.
Sadler's era, then you can easily favor him because he'd be able to get away with all the shit that he was able to do back then. But if you put Sadler's style in the 90s when Hamed was at his peak, it would be completely different because the referees were heavily locking down more so on that dirtiness that Sadler was incorporated back then.
Yeah, that's true.
And, there's ways of guys being crafty about it, like Holyfield and Bernard Hawkins. But Sadler took that to another level. Like that was a whole part of his style of just being an unruly brute and just elbowing you and kneeing you and doing whatever else, lacing you and all kinds of other nonsense. So, yeah, you got to look at it in that regard too.
It would have at least been fun, the lead up to the fight and Hamed.
Oh, because
December 4th, I'm knocking your spark out.
Yeah, Sadler was the type of guy too that you could tell he was a surly guy that didn't talk a lot. So he just would have been sitting there and just like taking all this in and nodding his head, just like building up this animosity. So he just
sounds good, buddy.
Yeah,
sounds good, buddy. And then just night. Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude, I think that's probably what happens is he might even catch something early on, but I think that Hamed takes a nap in that fight, dude. Yeah, no shame either. No shame. Let's see, featherweight. I had one that I thought would be a lot of fun, definitely offensive minded, and that's Tony Canzoneri versus Eric Morales.
Woo! Hell yeah.
I mean, Canzoneri's definitely got the offense as far as, And again, another fighter who I think holds up really, really well from that era and whose style would do just fine now against a fighter in Morales who probably holds up well in any era too. But a pissy fighter, somebody who, gets hit, wants to hit back, a tough guy, a guy whose style is difficult to compete against. He has a long jab, a good body puncher, etc. So I mean, I think this is a really difficult matchup for both guys.
Oh my god, man. Yeah, definitely. Said Morales, dude, he even back then with that chip on his shoulder that I had. Remember when he first came on the scene, because he was still a baby. He was only like 18, 19 when he was first featured in Ring Magazine as a new face. And then he was eventually featured. First time I remember seeing him was on the De La Hoya Chavez undercard when he fought Hector Acero Sanchez. But yeah, he, the whole bony look in him and the no muscle and anything like that. But the yeah, he had a very just a nasty way about him. Always did. Anytime you hit him, he was always wanting to get in there and get a double back. The way he turned southpaw on purpose against Pacquiao in the last round and still fought until the end. Like, he didn't give a shit. You know what I mean? That's the reason why everybody loves Morales today still. And he's looked upon as fondly as he is. There's very few guys that he didn't fight in those eras, like Hamed and Marquez are probably the most notable exceptions. And yeah, he just made for memorable wars. But him and Canzoneri, man, again, those are two beautiful styles that you could think matching because Canzoneri, as quick fisted as he was, and as boxer was, he was a guy that was up in your face too. You know what I mean? Like, he was going to run away from you. He got up in there. If you look at the footage of him, he was right up, very close, throwing those haymakers and other stuff, like just very, very, very fast. A beautiful boxer. Shit. I don't know, man. I think I'm gonna go with Canzoneri, actually. I think just overall in his overall activity would just let him trump Morales at the end.
And we're also talking about kind of like different sizes too, slightly, because obviously in
Morales,
Canzoneri's, what's that?
So who do you think was big? Go ahead.
Well, Canzoneri, I think, would have been at a height disadvantage, but it's like we're also talking about Canzoneri weighing with same day weigh-in, if he's but he also did move up too. So it's kind of like, featherweight might not have been his best weight class. That was probably junior lightweight and junior lightweight because he held both titles at the same time. But even so, he was still a really good featherweight. And he was weighing in at featherweight same day, whereas, at many, many years later, obviously, Morales is weighing in the day before, probably gaining weight. So, I mean, there's probably some size disparity there, but even so, putting all of that type of crap aside and just going like, how they look as fighters or how they fought or whatever, dude, Tony Canzoneri, also a very overwhelming style and a very precise puncher, the kind of puncher who was like, I don't have a ton of in-ring experience, like, but the stuff that I do remember is like, I remember being in with fighters who, like, even if they didn't punch, the kind of shit where like, it's like when you're not expecting to get punched, but then not only do you get punched, but you get punched like right in the fucking nose. And then it's like they see that you get punched in the nose and they're like, okay, I'm gonna keep punching you, like that type of shit, where it's like they're like zeroing in. That shit used to be so frustrating. I hated that. And it would be just like, I could, anyway, that was partially my problem because I was slow. But Canzoneri was exactly that kind of fighter where he was a really precise puncher. He'd like put 3, 4, 5 shots in on you in the same spot type of shit, and a very fast-handed fighter and good footwork. And so this is a really tough out for Eric Morales, who, like, you think of a fighter like Barrera, obviously a very skilled boxer and a very skilled boxer puncher, but Barrera could get you know goaded into a brawl like pretty much any day of the week. It's like you start hitting him and he's like, fuck it, let's go, which is a great thing about him. But it's that lack of discipline also that cost him in a number of fights. And it was only when he was able to discipline himself against like Hamed or whatever, that's when it was like he turned in those great performances. Against somebody like Canzoneri, Canzoneri is not going to do that type of shit to Morales where he's like, brawling with him and fucking with him type of stuff. I think he'd probably be more disciplined and box him. So based
You
on
know,
that, I'd probably go with Cantoneri.
and also too, I don't think that featherweight was Morales' best weight. Like he was still maturing body wise, like skill wise, he was incredible. But like I
Yeah, he
think
was still
so,
having trouble. Like, he was
yeah,
having trouble making weight up to like welterweight, dude.
totally. So like I think like his best weight though in terms of like performances by the time he started moving up in like 2001, 2002, 2003 and stuff, and then as from there, that's when you really started seeing the whole overall of his game. But so
I will
that's
say
great.
though, that southpaw against Pacquiao, it's not just that he turned southpaw and brawled with him. It's that after that's that he knew that everybody would love it when he did it,
Yeah.
and that
And
he
his
did it.
trainers, everyone was screaming, "Please God,
He,
don't do that."
and then fucking he goes up to Larry Merchant, and Larry Merchant is like giddy, like a little kid. He's like, and he's like, yeah, did he like it? Eric Mouse is like, ask him, did he like it? And he's like, of course he liked it, of course. That was for me the greatest thing about that was that Morales knew that everybody loved it, did it anyway, and was just like, "You like that shit? You guys like that shit?" That was so you got to give him badassery points, that's for sure. But yeah, Canzoneri might just be on a slightly different level here.
I agree. I agree. That's what I would go with. So
Bantamweight's a tougher out, dude. The
this,
bantamweight is I feel like one of the lesser known as far as depth. When you start saying, name the greatest bantamweight, some people are like, you know. So, what do you got at bantamweight?
um, gonna go turn of the century with Terry McGovern against Ruben Olivares.
Oh, whoa,
Yeah, think about that one.
man, Ruben Olivares,
Against Terry.
Rockabye Ruben.
Yeah,
He's an absolute LA staple for a number of
considered
years.
maybe the greatest bantamweight ever, or
Possibly,
one of the
yeah,
top. Yeah,
possibly the greatest bantamweight of all time. Uh, Terry McGovern. A lot of people forget that he was actually bantamweight champion. They remember the featherweight run, which is like I get it, but bantamweight champion first.
out of that bantamweight. Yeah,
Yeah, man, that's a
Terry
it's
McGovern, man. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't know. That's a weird. I guess I'd never really considered that. It's a weird matchup.
It is a weird matchup, but it's like one of those that even with the time period, just of all the contemporary accounts of what McGovern was, and what all of his contemporaries said, what the fans said, what the newspaper accounts said, dude was an animal. Like
Mhm.
he was a cross between like Duran and Mike Tyson and Stanley Ketchel almost, like just a vicious beast. And his run from 1899 to 1900 is something that still stands up today as one of the most impressive runs in boxing history. Because what he does is in 1899 he fights, excuse me, the bantamweight champion Pedler Palmer. Pedler Palmer was a bantamweight champion from the UK. I don't think he had suffered a loss at that point. I fought a who's who of what was around George Dixon, others, and just a very very slick fighter, good guy, a good all around fighter. Um, Same mentality in McGovern, kind of like born into it, and just a really tough guy at the time, who skill wise was looked upon as one of the best. And McGovern bludgeoned him. Thinking you can think in the same way like Mike Tyson, Michael Spinks just came in, blasted him really quick, and left the guy just splattered on the canvas. You know what I mean, like a murder victim. And for that time period, that was something rare. Most of those fights always usually went like no decisions or went rounds. No one was getting iced in
and
like
and
seconds.
that bias against the little guys, that ain't nothing new. Even back then they were just like, these little fucking bantamweight, the fuck are they? But then, here comes along
Yeah,
somebody like Terry McGovern who's just laying motherfuckers flat, and they're like, oh,
totally.
bantamweights could do that.
And
Oh,
that, and before that fight, that was a huge fight. McGovern, representing the U.S. Palmer, being the champion of England, traveling to the U.S. for this fight, and by all accounts, there was a lot of former champions ringside, like Jeffries and Corbett and other people all around there, and all half of them were for Palmer, and the other half were there for McGovern and everything. But to see that McGovern just left him there completely splattered in like under 2 minutes had everybody shocked. Everyone was just kind of like, whoa, no one had ever done that to Palmer. I don't think that really happened to him after that either. Moving on, He moves up to featherweight to fight George Dixon. George Dixon, up until that point, even though, white America would say it was Sullivan, was probably known as the greatest fighter pound for pound in history up until that point. Dixon was a bad motherfucker, man. Just a great fighter.
Yeah, there were some like, people who were like boxing types who were willing to be like, oh yeah, George Dixon's definitely the greatest fighter or whatever, but there weren't a ton of them.
Not a ton, no. Because a lot of people still too weren't even aware of him like that. You know what I mean? He was popular, but heavyweights ruled the day. And Dixon went so far back that the first major supercard of boxing, you would want to call it, was Corbett against Sullivan. And they did like instead of doing it all on the same day, they did a 3-day event. The first day was Jack McCuffley defending his lightweight championship. The second day was George Dixon defending his bantamweight championship. And then the third day was Corbett and Sullivan. So think about that's how far back he went. George Dixon had been the bantamweight champion, had been featherweight champion, it seems, since the beginning of times. All right. Like bantamweight champion before that, like and no one had legitimately really beaten him until then. There was no decision fights. There was other stuff going on, yada, yada, yada. But no one had taken a true, like, clear W on him like that until, like, Frank Ernie around that time. So maybe Dixon was, like, by 1900, he was slowing up a little bit. But still, there was no one that was really fucking with him. And when he fights McGovern, that was a fight. Apparently, I found out today, it was filmed. But, of course, one of the ones that was lost over times was known as one of those that, like, was known as one of the early great fights. Dixon early on was outboxing McGovern easily. And then just the viciousness of it became so much so that McGovern ended up taking over, dropped Dixon a bajillion times, and just left him. It was like a gory horror film, like something that would be like rated TVX today. You know what I mean? TVMA. Just Dixon bloody, beat up, just completely he was useless. It looked like the beef that Rocky was beating up in the Philadelphia butcher shop. So that's that featherweight. McGovern ain't done yet. Now he's gonna move up to lightweight to challenge Frank Ernie. He's not gonna win the championship. This was a non-title fight, but this was considered a major dream fight. Like think about like in modern era today, if you took someone like Naoya Inoue and moved them up to fight, moved them up to fight Devin Haney. If you want to like think about that, right? So that's how that is. And what's incredible is that like Ernie was considered at one of the greatest eras of lightweight history. Ernie was considered the top banana. He had beaten Gans, elbows, McFadden, the dude that I think you're a distant relative of, right? I thought you said you were or something. The former lightweight champion from that era.
News to me.
No, I thought you knew him, or you're a big or kid something.
Oh, Kid Levine?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, what I had mentioned, you might be getting wires crossed, but I mentioned that there's a really good book that's written by a distant relative of him.
Okay.
That I had interviewed the distant relative and that I knew the relative.
Yeah.
So
okay,
I probably got wires crossed, but I was like, damn,
yeah.
I got some royalty. What's up?
Shit, that would have been awesome. But anyways, like that, Ernie was considered the man of that era. McGovern moves up and ravages him in 2 rounds. So again, that would be like Naoya Inoue moving up to lightweight and then destroying Devin Haney. So like, you know what I mean? Like this is what McGovern was doing. No one was doing that at the turn of the century like that. No one would see anything like that again until the days of Jack Dempsey when he started terrorizing the division. Like McGovern was unlike anything the world had seen at that point.
Yeah, and he was actually a true superstar too. It wasn't just like he was a celebrity when this was like, people talk about vaudeville or whatever, but sometimes that word almost takes on too many different meanings where like they're like, what is even vaudeville? What does that mean? Basically, it's just that when they say that, they mean like, generally speaking, somebody was traveling and doing shows or something like that, and they were like sketch shows, either comedy, drama, whatever. Like, a lot of the time that meant they were acting or some performing in some way. And Terry McGovern did some vaudeville shows and acted in a couple of shows while he was fighting. Like it would be like he fought and then like the next week he just happened to also like, the week after he fought, he would be every night doing a performance at, blah, blah, blah theater type of shit. So he was not just, it shot him to fame. It wasn't like he was famous and then he became a fighter. He was famous because he was a fighter. And this type of run that you're,
everything he did from his families, from his parents, everything, like he was huge.
yeah, he was massive and more or less forgotten about today, but definitely one of the fighters who was, a sensation at the time and shocked people. Like you said, he was small, he was powerful, he was pasty white little dude. And so he's, he's knocking fools flat. I would imagine similar to a fighter who one of us may or may not bring up at flyweight, Jimmy Wild, just a little dude who was laying motherfuckers flat. And so that's shocking, but then fast forward to a guy like Ruben Olivares, who built up a massive fan base in Southern California when he was fighting in the 1960s and 70s, and was an immensely popular fighter, but also a really, really good fighter, exciting fighter, skilled fighter, could punch, could box. He was really well known. I don't know if it really extended much beyond Mexico or Southern California, to be honest. I couldn't say. But also another guy who probably gets forgotten about a little bit more than he should these days, even though he's still around.
Totally. And considering that he's probably, like I said, man, he might be considered the greatest bantamweight ever, and the body of work that he put in during that time, man, how deep that fucking division was, especially in his whole in his local area. Like the guys that he had to contend with, man, is insane. And the knockout streaks that he had, man, like that left hook, Rockabye Rubin, there was a reason for that. He was blasting dudes into another dimension left and right. Like he ran himself into it. And God, the record off the top of my head, but it was 40 something or 50 something and before he finally lost for the first time. And when he won the championship against Lionel Rose, who was a very good fighter himself and a good champion, it wasn't like he won that by decision. No, he knocked the shit out of Rose, man. He ravaged
during a very good era for that division too.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Rose was a good champion. He wasn't a bad guy. Like, he wasn't very popular on the West Coast because of the guys.
Yeah, because he got that decision over Chucho Castillo.
Yeah, and he wasn't from there. He was an Aborigine from Australia. You think they wanted to fuck with him on the West Coast? No, they wanted the championship for themselves. So for him, he had a good style, and he was a fast boxer and everything like that. And for him to win a close decisions that people thought they shouldn't have gone their way, yeah. So when Oliveras was able to finally ring the title from him, he was like a treasure to them because of that. They're like, finally, we got the title back to ourselves. But he had Oliveras had to deal with guys like Chucho Castillo, who became his main rival, Rafael Herrera, who defeated him for the belt, Jesus Pimentel, who's another forgotten contender, who had an incredible knockout streak himself. Like, these were the guys that Oliveras had to contend with back then. The contenders from Japan, other countries and stuff like that. Like, it was a deep, tough era. And Oliveras, for all his inconsistencies, because it's become well apparent and known over the years, the guy was a major partier. He didn't really train hard over the years, like probably squandered as much as he accomplished. He probably could have accomplished even more if he really took care of himself in and out of the ring like that. But, all things considered, man, just still adored because of his style and what he did. And if you think about that, you think of the way McGovern was and how wild he was, dude, those two just want to beat the shit out of each other.
Yeah, dude, we're going for bloodbaths today too, apparently.
Well, Teddy Brenner, the greatest matchmaker of all time, used to say things like, when I think of fights and how they want to be made, would it be a type of fight that the public will want to be seen? Yes, the public will want to see this. This is going to be like a damn monster movie, all right?
Yeah, this is like Alien versus Predator or some shit.
Send your kids to bed unless they're 18 years old. Don't let them watch this because it's going to be brutal and someone that's going to be hurt bad.
Yeah, dude. It's, it's Terry McGovern's, according to pretty much what everybody writes, his relentlessness and his punching ability and toughness, obviously, too, against somebody who's probably a little bit more stylistic, but dude, they also talk about, I will say for Ruben Olivares, my last little point about him before I make my, I guess, official pick here is that depending on who you ask, I mean, if you ask people who's the greatest Mexican fighter of all time, most people are going to say either Julio Cesar Chavez or Salvador Sanchez. And it's like, I get it. I'm not going to make a strong argument either way, and I don't really like making lists, but I have heard people say that they prefer Ruben Olivares, and I get why. If you truly do believe that he's the greatest bantamweight of all time, I mean, you're talking about the greatest fighter in a given division.
Yeah.
That's pretty tough. That's a really good argument to make for the great, the greatest in this chunk of people or whatever. So I mean, whatever. It doesn't really matter, and I don't think it's that important whether you believe he's the greatest Mexican fighter or whatever. But truly a great fighter. I probably would go just because I don't really know enough about Terry McGovern and visually his style. I'd go with Olivares, but we do know, like I said, dude, you go back enough into those eras, it's really difficult to argue against somebody who is willing and able to go that many rounds and who's potentially seen, bare knuckle combat on a regular basis.
Yeah.
It's tough to argue against those fighters.
KO Magazine one time, man, when they compared the two, they compared Terry McGovern, I think at featherweight against Bobby Chacon, and they said that McGovern would have knocked him out, which was interesting. But I have no idea. I'm gonna go the same way, man. Oliveras was just a whirlwind at bantamweight. And I don't care who you are. If that left hook connects, it's going to do some damage. And also, too, there was more layers to Oliveras' game. He just wasn't a slugger. When he lost the title to Chucho Castillo, and in their third fight, when he came back, Oliveras actually boxed in that one. He wasn't trying to slug. He became a boxer and he outboxed Castillo. And that was one of his most impressive performances. So there was different layers to Olivares' game. So yeah, I would think he would end up stopping him. I think more earlier than later because there's no way that fight's gonna go like in the middle rounds, let alone
no. Yeah, I would imagine not. No, dude, I don't think that fight's going real far.
Everyone's gonna be like bloodlust, just dreaming and drooling right there. Olivares is gonna be
or the Irish boy is gonna get cut up one way or another. One way.
Olivares is gonna be smiling with his gold tooth in his mouth right there, looking very close to him. They're just gonna go head to head.
Yeah, his goofy one golden tooth grin.
Yeah. And he'd have to put that in LA because why the hell not? You know what I mean? There was some white fighters in LA that were really popular. Art Hafey, for example, comes to mind. And yeah.
Well, dude, if you're talking about superstars, you can get McGovern in there for a late night showing at the Chinese theater or something like that. Whatever. So that'll work. I had a bantamweight matchup that I thought was pretty good, at least in terms of, again, I think that this is one for the purists. This is one that I think the analysts would really like, and that's Eder Joffre versus Orlando Canizales.
I was going to use Canizales at 1.2, so that's a great one.
I think that there's, at least for me, there's no question Joffre has the edge in terms of, many people believe he's the greatest bantamweight of all time.
Yeah.
And I ain't gonna argue that either. He had an incredible bantamweight run, obviously an incredible fighter overall. Also a fighter, even though he wasn't from that long ago, whose style holds up just fine decades later. Totally. Really, really good fighter and great inside fighter too. And that's what I think makes this really weird and interesting is that you got Orlando Canizales with that footwork and the way that he was always using angles and hopping around and shit. And then you have somebody like Joffre, who was a really, really good inside fighter. It's like, how the fuck would that go? I have no idea.
I'm just gonna call it a draw, bro. I'm not even sure. I'm dead serious. Like, if you put a gun to my head, I think Joffre edges it ever so slightly. But that's a tough one. That's a really tough one.
He's just the better technician. I think
started having struggling ever so slightly when he moved up, but at bantamweight, even though his competition wasn't the toughest, it was more of a weaker era for him, and he just had and he didn't really venture out trying to unify. He was kind of content staying with the IBF. Still, the body of work is right there, man.
But visually too, just stylistically,
saying, bro. That's what weird. I mean. The video, if you watch them and you watch, we've talked about it before, you watch Bam Rodriguez and you see the angles that he watched. Go back and watch Canizales and you'll see why we talk of the comparisons are always on Twitter. Canizales was beautiful, man.
Right. When you brought up Lomachenko, when people are talking about, Lomachenko's doing shit never seen before. It's like, dude, we saw it 25 years ago. Stop it.
And even more fluid with Canizales, the way he was doing it. Lomachenko, which comes, the whole jump around and the things and trying to be a little funny with it. Like, nah, Canizales was just kind of like more Duranish, you know what I mean? Like, it's going about his business and slip, pop, 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 like, oh, fuck, man, so good.
Yeah, dude. It's I think I got to give Joffre the edge, and probably a pretty clear edge. He's a better overall technician, better puncher, just fought the better fighters. But I mean, just visually, that would be a funky style matchup and funky fight. It would be fun.
Oh man, that would for the purists and people that enjoy like just good clean boxing would like, and you know the skill level at its highest, can't get any better than that. That would be like the fight that after it happened, teachers, not talking about trainers, but actual boxing teachers would be showing their students that one, like the way they should be showing Mccallum, James Toney, and such like that. So
yeah, they'd be doing those Lee Wiley Zapruder breakdowns of the fights and shit.
all right, man. Yeah. I mean, if you're able to do that, so on, man. But like the people that have been influenced to try to do that on their own, yeah, not so much. Keep your opinions to yourself, there, bro. Right. Calm
Watch
down there.
this jab.
Yeah. I like Wiley. I think I respect him and his opinion and like the stuff that he's been doing it for years, and clearly he knows his shit. And he's a historian as well. But like others,
yeah, but then other people feel like they
that's
can
what
do
I'm
the
saying.
same.
And you start that domino effect with a bunch of others who clearly aren't on that level, want to start putting it.
Yeah, who are like inventing shit that they're not actually seeing. Yeah.
I'm
with
you.
you.
Fucking kidding me, man? Like, shut up, bro. Like, relax.
Yeah,
but,
it's a bit much.
Yeah.
But
See,
who are the little guys?
For our little guys, man, like, you know, I love always going way back in time because just thinking of the different matchups and all that and whatever. But that being said, maybe a guy that you would have thought of too, Jimmy Wild, old friend of the show that we've talked about many times, against Mark Two Shop Johnson.
Ooh, there you go. See, I knew there were a couple of fighters in a couple of the divisions where I was like, I came up with backups just in case, because I was like, you know, just in case he also picks them, we won't have to like go over it twice or something like that. And Jimmy Wild was one, because I was like, you know, he's such a fascinating character. One of the things that always struck me too about Jimmy Wild was that I don't think he ever, you know, I'm not even going to grab my book, but I don't think he ever weighed in at the flyweight limit. I'm pretty sure he was like well short of it, like his entire career.
Hell no, he never weighed at 112. I'm pretty.
Like, I don't think he ever even came close to it.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through each one, but no, man, there was times that he weighed less than 100 pounds. Like, yeah, he was a tiny man. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think he ever even came close to it. And on top of he was always fighting dudes who were like, you know, well larger than him. And that's saying something when he was like literally knocking motherfuckers flat. Like, yes. and like scarily, according to reports, like this little teeny tiny little fucking super pale white guy just fucking blasting fools. And on top of that, just look at the photos. He does. I'm sorry, but he doesn't look normal. He looks like he's just got a weird body. I'm sorry.
He looks emancipated.
Yeah, emaciated. He's just like a little teeny guy,
sunken in, tiny thing. But with his shirt off, you can see that there is muscle definition there. Like, he looks kind of built. Of course, skinny. Like, you see that he's built, but then, you know, it is a very odd body shape. But then, you know, you think about his past and you think of the coal mines and how tough that was at the, you know, back in the early 1900s and where he had to come from. And that he probably spent his lunch break. Most guys back then working in the coal mines or working in lumber yards or wherever they spent their lunch break usually with a pack of cigarettes and a ham sandwich or some shit, right? Wild apparently spent most of his lunch breaks, you know, knocking the hell out of guys 100 pounds larger than him. Just for the fun of it. That's what they did. So, yeah, he had that type of experience that, like, you know, a guy's bigger than him. He definitely was probably
the boxing booths and
just everything.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but he said he's had something like 1,500 fights or something like that over the course of his life that they weren't even sure.
Well, if you think about it too, man, it probably not out the realm that about 10 to 15 slapstick bums at the lumber, you know, at the coal mines or wherever else he was catching work at would see a guy as goofy looking as he is, as small as he is, And hey, man, you want to take him? We'll throw like a couple of shekels at you for it or something like that. And he's like, oh, I'll take it, sure. Thinking you're gonna knock this easy stiff out. And it's like the carnivals when they would bring out the little guy out. Hey, man, if you can knock him off his handkerchief, we'll give you $100. You ain't gonna knock him out. Instead, you're gonna catch yourself with some teeth missing and concussion. And unfortunately, works. You're gonna lose work now for the next week because you've been trying to find your insides after what Wild does to you. Really, fascinating is the right way to put it, Pat, because that's what he is. He comes from an era that is, we know a lot more than we did, obviously, from the past, and there's still more to be learned about him. And Wild is one of those guys that, like, as much as we know about his career and his style, because there is footage of him out there, and you can see that his style is different than what was considered, the norm back then. He wasn't a milling guy that was kind of like going in there and mauling you. Like he had a lot of skill to him. Like he was a type of a counter puncher. He could slip in punches. And
he was like a touch, boom fighter.
And the type of style that if you look at it today, you watch him today, be like, you know what, that would work well enough that like, because a lot of those European guys, it's almost his style could be like derived, obviously, as decades and generations before. But you look at someone like Calzaghe, you look at a couple other dudes like other fighters. You can see semblances of how Wild fought and how they fought, and like little bits and pieces. I'm not saying they went back and watched Jimmy Wild fight and do like, yeah, I'm being influenced by that, but you can see like, his style and see theirs, and you see, what, there's differences, but like
both Welsh.
Yeah,
maybe there's something to it
too, totally. But you get where I'm going with that, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
What I'm trying to say is that like Wild's style was different compared to most of the contemporaries of his era. He stood out.
Oh yeah, there's absolutely no question. And like you can look to on his record, even like those losses that he had, again, were to fighters who were generally much bigger than him, but also he seemed to have a style that was confusing to a lot of his contemporaries. And also I would imagine just looking at him, like you said, dude, I mean, going in there and you're just like, what is this? And the next thing you know, you're fucking waking up like, whoa.
He has no facial hair. He looks like he's 12 years old. He looked younger than that fucking kid that fought in Mexico that Roy Jones. All right, literally, he did. So
yeah, he did. Yeah, even as like an old guy, he still looks like a young kid. And it wasn't until he was like pretty much all but done against Pancho Villa that he winds up getting, banged out like that. And even then, he is well past it. He's like wearing all of his clothes when he weighs in, all sorts of shit. He's just, it's an anomaly.
He was basically brought out of retirement just to give Villa
literally, yeah,
because he wasn't really active. His last fight before that, I think, was against the great bantamweight champion Pete Herman, who knocked him out. So yeah, at that point, I mean, he was just being brought in just to kind of pass the belt off. Villa was already the American champion. He had knocked out Johnny Buff. He was, the rampaging Murata that was looked upon as the coronation. And yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, Wild did, put up a good challenge. And if he was younger, there's a good chance he probably would have beat Villa and held him back. But by that time, he was all used up. And he even said so after the fight.
Yeah.
And what's crazy again is that Ray Arcel was apparently there. Old ass Ray Arcel, who you used to see in Larry Holmes' corner in 1982, said that he was ringside for Pancho Villa and Jimmy Wild. And he said that something happened in that fight where I think Wild was knocked silly after the bell rang or something like that. It was like really bad. Like Villa clocked him. And Wild who was already getting beat up at that point, was essentially done. Like he was done from that. And he said that he noticed Wild's cornermen did absolutely nothing in terms of like trying to cause a ruckus or doing anything. They were just kind of like, whatever. And Arcel was pissed off, he said, and he vowed to himself, he's saying whenever he worked a corner, he would never allow anything like that to ever happen, like to his fighters or anything like that, But
that's crazy.
I thought that was like an interesting tidbit. Yeah.
Well, that's crazy that he was that old to go back that far and remember that. But I mean, Jimmy Wild, yeah, dude, that's somebody who's, I mean, it might not make for like a great Hollywood story, but just in terms of just interesting person, that's a crazy life. And then you put him in with somebody like Mark Johnson, another like style clash. And the one that I have is a style clash too. It's just, a guy who is a really good technician, an incredible counterpuncher, a pound for a dude who never got his due on a pound for pound level, and probably, yeah, he's missing some key and like signature wins on his ledger that probably prevented him from getting there, and he didn't get the love that he should have gotten. Good old DC fighter, um, but just obviously really skilled and probably underrated in terms of punching too.
Oh
So
my
I
God,
mean,
incredibly
dude, this is
underrated.
a man. It could be a whoever lands first type of thing, but it's just that like I'm so like Jimmy Wild and his fucking wild punching power, bro. Like it's just you cannot overlook that. You can't do it.
And as brilliant as Johnson was at flyweight, and I mean, think about it, there wasn't really anyone that could stick with him there. Um, After he became champion, before he became champion, he did struggle a few times. There's that one fight where he had where Salazar, I think it is, right? I don't remember his first name.
Was that Willie or
Willie,
no?
Willie
Yeah,
Salazar.
that's totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of
Um,
wires crossed,
he was a Panamanian fighter. Panamanian fighter.
excuse me.
And they called that fight the flyweight Hagler Hearns because Johnson was almost knocked out in it. Like he got hurt a few times. And there was a wild back and forth fight that Johnson eventually, I think, stopped Salazar in round 3 or so in. But I don't remember his first name. It's off the top of my head, I don't, but I think his last name is Salazar. Anyways, that's one example. Another one, he struggled in his fight with another forgotten fighter from the 90s, Alberto Jimenez, who was a former bantamweight champion from that time, WBO version. So Jimenez completely forgotten today, but rugged, tough guy. Holds wins over a lot of fighters from that era and gave everybody hell. And yeah, Johnson, I think, scored like a really close split decision over him. So yeah, Johnson could, as after watching him knock out Francisco Tejedor and then just beat the bejesus out of every other contender that he fought at that time. Trust me, there were guys, the flyweight division that he was in was strong, but it wasn't like a golden era of flyweights. You know what I mean? So yeah, if you put him in with a guy like Wild, who looks sickly and looked like someone that probably should have had an IV in him, as opposed to being in the ring, nah, that's trust me, it's a good fight. It's a close fight, and Wild's skills, at that point, like there wasn't anything he hadn't seen. Even someone like Johnson, as brilliant as he was. So
Yeah, and again, I think stylistically, it's really it's tough for me not to give the advantage to someone who it's like if a fighter is going to wait, whether
yeah,
they're a counter puncher or whatever at all, it's tough not to give the advantage over somebody who's not going to wait and who's going to fill that void with punches.
yeah.
And that's the kind of fighter that I would imagine Jimmy Wild would be against a Mark Johnson. So I mean, but again, it's one of those fights where like whoever lands first, if they land big, could be going to sleep. But I'd probably give the advantage to Wild.
If they had 3 fights, I think they all split them.
Yeah, could be like 1-1-1.
Totally, it would be tough, man. But I think it would just be fascinating too. Like just yeah, it would be a fascinating one. So that's my last entry.
So I'll close it out here with something that might be a little bit easier in terms of it. Like we're not going to have to explain too much about one guy because he's very recent. He's technically still fighting,
Yeah.
but without any doubt, a flyweight great, and that's Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez.
Yes.
I mean, I don't really think I need to say a whole lot more. We understand why he's great. Absolutely incredible fighter. Keeps his hands moving. Really great footwork. Uses angles, etc. Knows what the fuck he's doing in there.
Dude, just oh my god, what a pleasure to watch. I
But
love Chocolatito.
and obviously we've seen that at a slightly bigger weight and also past his best, his poison was Srisake Sorongvisai, who's like, that's a tough fighter to replicate, dude. Just a strong, tough as nails dude who could punch like a motherfucker. That's a really tough fighter to replicate. However, I do think that Roman Gonzalez could have a problem with somebody like a Miguel Canto, somebody who has
Yeah.
really no punching power, but is slippery as shit. And like I've said before, I like to give extra credit to those fighters who can get it done with like no punching power. And
Mhm.
Miguel Canto did really, really well in a very difficult flyweight division with like no punching power.
Fuck yeah, man. Amen to that. I think only out of all the defenses he had, I think only one of them he stopped one of his opponents. Everything else went the distance.
He
And
yeah, he had like no power, dude.
think of the guys again, like you mentioned, man. I'm just gonna mention two of them, but like these are the guys you got to deal with as contemporary. Shoji Oguma,
Mm-hmm.
bantamweight who became champion, as well as the guy that is longtime rival, um, Batilio Gonzalez. So
Who
like,
himself was an all-time great.
yes, and is on the Hall of Fame ballot and probably should be in the Hall of Fame, but that's a whole other issue. But I mean, think about that. That's just those two, and then you have a host of other contenders from that era that were just vying for the belt and just badasses. I mean, I think he beat Prudencio Cardona for an entitled defense. There was a ton of other guys like, and you said, man, there was no power with him, absolutely none. Canto was trained. If you're gonna recognize his trainer's name, he was trained by a guy named Professor Jesus Rivera. If you recognize that name, that was Oscar De La Hoya's trainer for a cup of coffee in the mid '90s. But
He's one of the various dudes that got blamed.
yeah. Well, I mean, that was De La Hoya's fault for picking Rivera to train him against Pernell Whitaker. I'm sorry, but that's literally the last guy you want him training you to fight Whitaker.
Yeah, but, dude, you want somebody who's gonna who can train you to just go animal and just not stop punching ever, like, because there's no other way.
Yeah, so that's on De La Hoya for making a bonehead move on that one. But anyways, Canto was one of the most brilliant flyweights you'd ever see. Like, he's just incredible fighter, and yeah, that's a good one. It's a really, really good one. But if you really put them head to head, I think Chocolatito skill wise can hold up with Canto.
I agree, dude.
I think so.
Yeah,
and
all that. I know they're. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I said with all that, together, if you put their skills together, I think Chocolatito holds up with him and his power pushes him over.
Yeah, I agree, dude. I think that's going to be kind of like how we saw against Sorong Visai. Not so much in the first fight because I thought Chocolatito should have won that fight, but in the rematch especially, it was almost like he did everything that he tried in the first fight, but it wasn't making a dent. Totally. Sorong Visai was like, nah, not tonight, dude. And it almost feels like that could be what would happen with Canto against Gonzalez. Like, yeah, dude, you could give him everything you got. You can hit him with your best shot ever, and Chocolatito is just going to walk right through it. And if that's the case, and he doesn't feel like there's any danger, yeah, that could be a tough night for Canto, as much as I really like the guy, who's also still around, too, by the way. And last I saw, it looked like he was in very good shape. But
he's
in any case,
Hall of Fame once. I think he won when he got inducted. I don't know if he ever went after that, but he got inducted before I started going.
I'm pretty sure he still lives in the Yucatan he's the first ever Yucatan Mexican champion from the Yucatan Peninsula. And I'm pretty sure he still lives down there. But in any case, yeah, dude, very, very great fighter, very underrated when people talk about the greatest Mexican fighters, in my opinion.
But his fall was drastic, unfortunately, too, because of his lack of power.
That's what's tough.
After he lost his title to the Korean fighter named Chan Hee Park, and that's an interesting fight in itself too, because Park was an upstart who only had a handful of fights at that point. I think he might have been an Olympian or so. And when they fought, Park whips him for like the first 12 rounds or so, like first 10 or 12 rounds, like doesn't lose a round. And for a guy like Canto who had been around and outboxed everybody and all that, to see him just getting cooked like that is kind of just like, holy shit, Canto rallied in the championship rounds, but he still lost a pretty wide decision. And then they fought a rematch, and I think he ended up in a draw in that one. He performed better in it, but yeah, the glory days are over. And after that, aside from a couple of wins, including one against a future world champion, he got stopped a number of times later in his career. But yeah, that's his lack of power. You know what I mean? So
yeah, dude, it's a really tough. And also on top of that, stylistically, I mean, he didn't have power, and so he wasn't like super aggressive. He wasn't super offensive. He was obviously more of a counter puncher. And I mean, I hate to just lean into that fucking stereotype. We're like, oh, well, Mexican people just want the aggression and that's all they want, because that's not fucking true.
Absolutely,
and,
yeah. Absolutely
but not. I mean, but nonetheless, whether it's in Mexico, China, the US, wherever, aggressive fighters, action fighters are generally going to be more entertaining. And so his style was just not nearly very well received, and he wasn't a super popular champion for that reason, which sucks, because like I said, he should get more credit. But against Gonzalez, against the Chocolatito Gonzalez, that lack of power, it's going to hurt, dude. It's going to hurt bad.
Totally. That's a great one, man. That another one, skill wise, that's a one that You're going to want to show students. You're just going to go back and watch it because it's going to be absolutely brilliant on display for both fighters. But Gonzalez, man, the thing that my favorite performance of his is probably against Brian Floria. Like there's so many you can pick from, but the reason why I love that one is because Valoria came in at his peak himself. You remember how much he was training and how good he looked, and he looked
good during the fight too.
Amazing during that fight. And if you look, and Chocolatito was struggling with his weight before that fight, correct? Because I remember he was on the scales and he looked drained and he just looked kind of worn out. And so there was speculation. I actually picked Valoria to win that fight because of all those factors. I thought that Valoria was going to go with the upset special, and that's not for me not liking Chocolatito. He's one of my favorite fighters. I just thought there was a chance for it, but man, Valoria put on a brilliant fight. One of those performances that against anyone else in that division clearly would have won.
Totally.
But every time he started gaining some slight momentum, Chocolatito just took it to another level. And you remember right near the end when Valoria landed that brilliant body shot that doubled over Chocolatito. Like he was clearly hurt from it. He just sucks it up. He's just like sucks in some wind, gathers himself, and just kind of just wows out from it.
Yeah,
man.
it was like taking that breath somehow revitalized him. He's like, okay, I'm good.
Because
what was in that oxygen?
Any of us taking that body shot would have just been like, oh,
yeah,
like,
mommy.
Like one of my favorite quotes. One of my favorite quotes when Richard Pryor says, "When your air just says fuck it," he just takes off the body.
Nah, yeah, I'm good on that.
But no, that's a good one. But Chocolatito, man, fits in mythical matchups for the flyweight division, fits in well with anyone in history. My God, imagine him and Pascual Perez. Imagine him and Sachet Lada. Imagine him and fighting Harada. Imagine him and Mark Johnson. Like God, Jimmy Wild. Yeah.
Just like one of those technicians who's totally undersold, like Arbachikov.
Yes.
Like
totally.
That would have just been fun, just from a skill perspective. That's exactly.
Arbachikov is a beast, man. That dude could bang like a motherfucker. Are you kidding me? Him and Mark Johnson would have been the tits if they had ended up fighting at the end of the 90s. But no, man, unfortunately, because they had parallels kind of crossing around that point. But unfortunately, by the time Johnson became champion, Arbachikov lost his belt to Chatachai Sasaku and subsequently retired immediately after that. So,
Yeah, dude, that's exactly why we need to be, cherishing Roman Gonzalez for as long as he's around. You know how the memes protect that fucking guy for real. Because I mean, that guy's
him too for reviving, like making the resurgence for what he did in terms of popularity in the lower divisions.
Yeah,
because there was guys that were getting on television.
The last great thing that HBO did, dude.
Totally. Yeah.
So. It's the last fucking great thing HBO boxing did was trying to recognize the little guys for sure. Dude, there wasn't nearly as much homework to do when it comes to this. This was a lot, mostly just fun.
Fun, man. Remember how we just talked at the beginning of the show? It's just fun to talk and speculate this shit. Exactly what we just did.
Exactly. Yeah, we pretty much just fucking around. Ain't no homework to do. Ain't nothing difficult about it, really. But no, hey, dude, I appreciate it, man, for sure, because it's a lot of fun. We're definitely gonna have to revisit this again or do a different format or whatever, man. It's a lot of fun. Thank you. Appreciate it. Everybody, thank you so much if you listened in. I mean, if you listened into that whole thing, number one, you're sick. I don't know what's wrong with you, but thank you. Appreciate it. If you watched, also, thank you. Either way, go ahead and subscribe if you listen on the podcast apps. Give us a reply or a comment, a rating. And also, if you watched on YouTube, subscribe. Leave us a reply. You guys have been really good about doing that lately. Appreciate that. I'm going to try to respond to them as much as we can. As far as social media goes, the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on social media like Facebook and Instagram, but we're also on Twitter. Individually, we're on Twitter, ourselves. Aris, my boy, is on there as Punch Zone Aris. I'm there as Patrick M. Connor. So say hi. We'll say hi back. Aris, we'll talk soon, bro.
Have a good one, everyone.
Later, everybody.